the great and glorious Northern Wall. Just yesterday, life here was peaceful. But overnight, everything changed. Instead of tranquility, there was the din of attackers who had come to destroy everyone. Every house was engulfed in flames. The attackers decided to destroy every inhabitant of this glorious place. In just one night, a joyful life turned into hell. The villains destroyed ordinary people who had no weapons to defend themselves. Everyone hoped that someone would come to their aid. But the more people were killed, the less hope there was for salvation. Every second of the horror seemed like an eternity until the people heard the clang of swords. Hope began to return to the people. Finally, someone had come to protect them. For the attacker, the appearance of a person who could repel his blow was unexpected. He was very angry that someone dared to go against him. The villain's eyes were filled with rage. All he wanted was to quickly destroy the defender and continue destroying everything around him. Skillfully swinging his sword, the villain began to attack. He tried to strike blow after blow so that the defender would not have a chance to strike back. Of course, the villain thought he could easily defeat the young man, but the boy was able to parry the blows of the man in the mask. The Ragnar clan. A great ducal clan that defended the empire on the northern edge of the continent. Of course, the Ragnar clan was able to strengthen itself 1,000 years ago, thanks to the great northern wall and the special structure of its members' bodies. It is said that their physique was inherited from a powerful and strong dragon. The heirs of Ragnar were born with exceptional magical powers and endurance, as well as a talent for fencing, all except one. He couldn't understand anything. No matter how hard he tried, there were things that were beyond his reach. The people called it bad luck. Everyone considered the young man hopeless. He was part of the clan, but he could not inherit its talent. The man decided to take off his mask to reveal his face. He seemed to be mocking the young man. It would also be bitter for him, the man said to the very young Theo. Theo looked at the man in surprise. It was Rondon. The young man was very curious to know why Rondon had done this. Rondon decided to explain to Theo how sad it was to watch the young man train every day. Theo trained tirelessly, even though he knew he had no talent. Theo trained for a long time, but unfortunately it was all in vain. Rondon constantly mocked the boy. He told Theo that the nickname Ragnar the Dimwit suited him very well. Upset and angry, Theo decided to remind Randon that he was the one who suggested he become the young man's fencing instructor to teach him all the useless tricks. Theo did not hold back his anger. Why did Randon teach him so that he could betray the palace of the Trojans? And all this for the sake of scoundrels. But Randon couldn't understand why young Theo blamed him for everything. Didn't the young man understand that it was all his fault? Rindon seemed to be mocking the boy. He lifted Theo's head and asked him to look at the Palace of Roses, which was engulfed in flames. He decided to ask Theo why his family had died, but then one of the scoundrels placed the body of his mother in front of Theo. Rendon continued to speak. Why had the young man's mother died? All because Theo was a weak-minded wrangler in a clan based on the power of the strong. The boy looked at his mother with pity and despair. Everything seemed to freeze inside him. But Rendon considered the boy to be the weakest. Theo was enraged by the words and actions of the scoundrels. Without thinking twice, Theo grabbed his sword and lunged at Rendon. It seemed that Randon did not expect the attack at all. Randon was simply asked to kill the boy as quickly as possible instead of talking too much. Randon explained that he had simply been lost in his memories. He explained that he had almost finished with the boy. It was very painful for Theo to watch everything burn to ashes. He was unable to save anyone. It was painful to realize this. If only he had the talent. Everything could have turned out differently, but Theo Ragnar had been destroyed. After that, Theo's ability was activated. Return to the point of regression. Theo stood confused, not understanding what was happening. What a way to end today's lesson. It seemed like the boy needed a rest. The coach couldn't understand why Theo was confused. Theo himself couldn't understand what was happening, because he knew for sure that he had died. It was hard for the boy to believe that he was seeing Randon's ugly face in front of him. It seemed like Theo's whole life flashed before his eyes. A blue screen appeared in front of Theo with a task. The boy looked at the screen in confusion. His first task was to hit Randon in the face. Theo didn't understand what was happening or why he had been given such a task. It seemed to the young man that Randon couldn't see the screen. Randon himself still didn't understand what was happening to Theo. Everything was unclear, but Theo believed that this was a gift from above. God had given the young man the opportunity to vent all his frustration before he was forgotten. So Theo decided to complete the task and punched Randon in the face. It was unclear why the dream seemed so realistic, and Theo's punch was so weak. Randon couldn't understand why the young man had decided to hit him. Randon was enraged by Theo's actions, so he struck back hard. Training was over for the day, so he would continue next time. Not now. Theo continued to believe that it was a dream. But is it possible to feel pain in a dream? Randon understood the young man's irritation. The awakening ceremony was about to take place, but no matter how much Theo trained, there were no results. The awakening ceremony? Theo couldn't understand what Randon was talking about. Ragnar should use a sword, not his fists. Besides, Randon couldn't forgive his student for attacking his coach. Everyone constantly mocked Theo. The other students believed that the boy had no right to blame his coach when he himself was lacking in talent. The students thought Theo was very untalented. If he was only capable of a weak punch, then he had no place among the Ragnars. But Theo didn't care about the others' mockery. He couldn't believe he was feeling pain. All the sensations were real. Finally, Theo realized that these were not memories or a dream. Everything that was happening was real. The awakening ceremony took place 10 years ago. It turned out that Theo had returned to the time when he was only 17 years old. It was hard to believe that such a thing was even possible. A blue screen appeared in front of Theo again with a message saying that the boy had successfully completed the training task. As a reward, the young man would receive Ragnar's talent. Theo had always dreamed of having a talent, so he accepted the reward without hesitation. A bright light enveloped the young man's body. Now, Theo also had a talent. All of Theo's characteristics would increase at a rapid pace. It was all exciting but also confusing. Theo had many questions, but he did not yet have the answers. A new task began, the Palace of Roses. It was a warm summer day. The sun warmed the earth with its rays. Theo still found it hard to believe that he could see the palace intact again. Everything seemed quite strange. Some admired the beauty of nature, others trained, and Rondon, as always, talked about Theo's successes. Rondon had never met such talented students. But that was why Rondon was in the palace, to teach Theo everything he knew. Rondon was confident that in 5 months he could make Theo strong enough for the awakening ceremony. Lady Cecilia Rangar of the Palace of Roses. She believed that Rondon could make Theo stronger, and that the young man would soon be able to show good results. Cecilia gave Randon a bag of money and asked him to pay special attention to Theo. Of course, Randon assured Cecilia that he would train with Theo day and night. But Cecilia just smiled sweetly and assured Randon that she had no doubts about Theo. It seemed that Randon was only interested in money. He didn't train Theo very well and didn't devote enough time to him. Randon believed that all failures could be attributed to a lack of talent. Randon believed that the Rangar family would not be around for long. He decided to see how much Cecilia had paid for Theo's training this time. The payment was quite good this time. A sly smile appeared on Randon's face. He believed that Theo had secured a bright future for him. Randon decided to simply profit from the boy's lack of talent. Theo ran down the hallway toward Randon. At first, Randon thought the boy wanted to hit him again, but Theo ran past him. Theo hurried to his mother's room. He just wanted to see her again. Cecilia looked at Theo in surprise. His behavior seemed strange, but Theo didn't care how he looked. He just hugged his mother. Tears rolled down Theo's cheeks. Cecilia didn't understand why her son was crying. Maybe training had been hard, but Theo had finally realized that he had really gone back 10 years in time. Theo looked at his mother, but before his eyes stood that terrible day when Rondon destroyed the entire Rangar family. Theo had only one option. He had to change the future. Theo understood perfectly well that he was weak and had nothing to offer. But if the secret message was true, then Theo had every chance of becoming stronger. Strong enough to survive the futile battle for the throne. And also strong enough to take revenge on the villain Randon. But first, Theo had to complete his second training quest. The boy had to improve his body. Theo's great desire to take revenge on Randon tore him apart from within, but the young man understood that his body was weak, so he had to focus on improving his strength. In his past life, Theo was part of the Black Snow Intelligence Agency, but due to his lack of abilities, he was demoted to the team of informants. The elixir of the Emperor's Bloody Sword. This potion greatly strengthens the body. The meaning of this potion will be revealed in the future in a secret manual, but the most important thing will be the resumption of the extreme training that Theo had abandoned, for one reason only, lack of talent. As soon as the sun rose, Theo immediately began his training. Now he could do anything, because Theo had Ragnar's talent. The message turned out to be true. The students looked in amazement at Theo, who was running in circles without stopping. They found it hard to believe that this was the same boy who, not long ago, couldn't even run a single lap. Theo kept telling himself that he would run as much as he couldn't before. He would also swing his sword like he couldn't before. Theo was able to improve his physique by 65%. He had just a little left to complete the quest. Now Theo would be able to become truly strong. Theo trained hard day and night. He was highly motivated to learn by thoughts of revenge against Rendo. Evelyn Nerville was the manager of the 4th training ground. She constantly watched Theo, who had been training without sleep for several days. Evelyn knew very well that Theo was considered a dim-witted Rangar, but Evelyn began to doubt whether he was really talentless. Theo was training at the limit of his abilities. Last night, the boy completed 90% of his tasks. Exhausted, he fell to the ground. But after a short rest, his task completion rate dropped by 1%. If Theo was forced to train without stopping, then it was worth continuing the training. So, gathering the strength he still had left, Theo continued to see the task through to the end. To finish his second training quest, Theo only had to make a little more effort. In order to continue training, Theo constantly reminded himself that he couldn't give up because he was almost at the end. Evelyn looked at the young man in amazement. She couldn't understand why he was pushing himself so hard. Finally, he did it. Theo completed the second task. But everything blurred before Theo's eyes because he couldn't see what was written on the blue screen. Theo was so exhausted that he simply lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes, Theo saw that he had to choose whether he wanted the reward on the blue screen. Barely raising his hand, Theo pressed yes. Again, a bright light appeared around Theo. Evelyn was watching all this. She had no idea what was happening to the boy. The next morning, Theo woke up in a room. It was difficult to understand how he got there and whose room it was. Evelyn asked Theo not to worry. It was a rest room for the 4th training ground. She explained that even Ragnar could lose consciousness from heavy exertion. Theo was surprised to see Evelyn standing in front of him, but Evelyn herself was surprised that Theo remembered her. She explained that Theo had lost consciousness during training, so she had carried him to the room. Evelyn decided to ask the young man if he knew that in Ragnar's clan, it was forbidden to awaken mana before the awakening ceremony. Theo assured her that he knew all the rules. But Evelyn continued to talk about how Theo should have known the consequences of breaking this rule. Theo didn't understand why Evelyn was asking him such questions. So Evelyn decided to explain that before Theo lost consciousness, there was a wave similar to the one that accompanies the opening of Mana. It was hard to believe Evelyn that young Theo had opened the gate of Mana, but Theo just looked at Evelyn in surprise. If he had opened the gate of Mana, he would have been destroyed long ago. For completing the task, Theo received the Dragon Heart Award. He also received an additional award for completing the task quickly, the magical powers of the last 10 years of his life. Upon learning about the Dragon Heart Award, Theo was infinitely happy. The Dragon's Heart is a magic gate that can be placed inside an awakened person. But humans are not dragons. so the dragon heart was placed in the lower abdomen because the human heart could not withstand the palace. This placement made the Palace of Mana more effective. Every warrior like Ragnar strives to obtain a dragon heart. It was an easy way to become extremely powerful. However, humans were unable to overcome the limitations. Theo was happy that the dragon's heart was inside him. It was a wonderful reward for completing the quest. But Evelyn saw how Theo received his reward. It was because of her that Theo found himself in a precarious situation. Evelyn Nerval was a high-ranking swordswoman. She retired after losing her left arm. She was the commander of the Dragon Riders in white armor. Her abilities were so remarkable that even the Dragon Demon admired her. In addition, everyone knew about her integrity. Evelyn was not interested in power or status. She could not tolerate dishonor or cowardice. Evelyn was supposed to be Theo's teacher, but because of her stubbornness, she refused to teach the boy. So if Evelyn finds out that Theo has the heart of a dragon, he will be destroyed in an instant. But if Theo didn't get caught, Evelyn only spoke of destruction because of Theo's poor health. Evelyn was simply curious to see if Theo could really cope with the consequences. At that moment, only one idea came to Theo's mind: to use Evelyn's own words against her. Theo was the heir to the Ragnar family. He tried to explain to Evelyn that if her suspicions turned out to be unfounded and false, it would look like an attempt to disgrace the Ragnar name. Evelyn understood this perfectly well, but Theo decided to ask Evelyn if she knew what punishment awaited anyone who tried to humiliate the heir. Destruction awaited anyone who humiliated the heir. Evelyn didn't understand what she was feeling. Had Theo always been like this? Evelyn was sure she had felt a wave of mania, so she decided to check everything. Although Theo was Ragnar's heir, he had to follow the rules. There could be no exceptions. So Evelyn placed her hand on Theo's stomach. The surprise was clearly visible on Evelyn's face. She did not feel the aura of power inside the young man. Theo looked at Evelyn for a while, wondering if she had found anything. It was hard for Evelyn to realize that she had been wrong. She was sure of what she had seen. The rules were the same for everyone. Evelyn admitted that she was wrong and asked Theo to punish her. She believed that her worthless life should be the price she paid for her sin. Theo understood that the dragon's heart was different from an ordinary heart. The existence of the dragon's heart was completely controlled by its owner. Theo was able to hide his heart at will. Moreover, a human's possession of a dragon's heart would only be revealed after several years. So Theo could remain calm. No one could find out about his secret. Theo assured Evelyn that no one needed to be destroyed. She was just doing what she had to do. Moreover, not many people would risk their lives to learn the truth from the heir. The young man understood perfectly well that Evelyn was one of the strongest, so he decided to explain before leaving. The ban on awakening the Chamber of Mana before the ceremony was imposed to prevent it from overflowing. It warmed Theo's heart that Evelyn was simply worried about the chamber being overrun by the villain Ragnar. Theo thanked her for her concern and left. Evelyn sat on the floor for a while, staring in amazement at the open door. It was hard for her to comprehend what had happened in the last few hours. Theo walked down the palace corridor, thinking about the dragon's reward and the increase in strength he had gained over the past 10 years. Now he was going to become incredibly powerful. Several days passed. Rondon was training with Theo, but as always, Rondon was dissatisfied with how the young man held his sword. The only thing that comforted Theo was that he was getting stronger, but pretending that he was still weak was difficult, and listening to Randon was unbearable. Theo knew that Rondon was a scoundrel. He also taught strange techniques. The young man began to suspect more and more that someone more powerful was behind Rondon, the one who destroyed the boy. Theo had to find out who this person was. Theo was sure he could figure it out. Theo was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice he had started muttering something. Randon didn't like this at all, so he decided to remind the boy that talking was not allowed during training. Theo no longer had the strength to learn Randon's poor techniques. The young man couldn't understand how Randon had become a mid-level fencer in the first place. Theo was sure that Randon had to fight hard even against low-level demons. Randon was very angry at Theo's words. The boy believed that Rendo was teaching him only to keep an eye on him. He approached Rendo to tell him that his skills were terrible. All Theo wanted was to make Rendo give up training. Rendo was beside himself with rage, but Theo decided not to stop. If Theo could ruin Rendon's plans, the scoundrel would surely contact the main conspirator, Camellia Palace. News of Theo's duel with Randon spread quickly among the others. The students had never liked Theo. They always made fun of him. Everyone believed that Randon would surely cripple the boy for accusing him of weakness. The boy who had mocked Theo was unexpectedly hit in the head with a glass of drink. 4 Hounds of the North, the Dark Leopard, Axion Ragnar. He didn't care about the bastard's physical condition at all. The Silver Lion Remington Narzio. But outside, someone assured them that they should be concerned about the boy's physical condition. 9 Dragons. The Heavenly Dragon, Ed Troyvon. Ed assured everyone that everything could go wrong if they lost their vigilance. Action assured him that this only applied to gifted people, so Ed shouldn't worry so much. There was no point in worrying about a scoundrel. But Ed explained that unpredictable things could happen to the Ragnars, even if they were unlikely. A flame in the wind could flare up at any moment. Axion was sure that the news was good. Rondon could take care of everything for them. A week passed. The day of the duel arrived. All Theo wanted was for Rondon to retire after being humiliated, but the situation got out of control. But there was no turning back. Theo received his 3rd training quest. He had to fight Randon and defeat him. On that day, while humiliating Randon, Theo announced that he was fired. But Randon had a signed contract, and as long as the contract was in force, Randon would continue to teach. But Theo was Randon's boss. Theo just wanted to destroy Randon, but he wasn't entirely confident in his abilities yet. First, he needed to get information from the scoundrel. Rondon began to get nervous. He had to convince Theo somehow, because if Rondon was fired, he would fail his mission. Rendon immediately began begging Theo to stop. It was against the rules. Rendon began threatening to report him to the tribunal, but Theo couldn't be stopped. He had to complete the quest. Then it would be necessary to resolve the matter using Ragnar's method. Theo turned his head and saw Evelyn. The young man did not understand what Evelyn meant. Evelyn suggested settling the dispute with a sword duel. There would be no tribunal, the winner would have the final say. Rondon was not opposed to this, as he was a skilled swordsman. The match was to take place in a week. It seemed that everyone was happy with this option except Theo. He was unsure that he could defeat Randon. The stands were packed. Every student knew very well that Theo was completely useless with a sword, but Theo was a Ragnar, so some did not believe that the boy was completely incapable of fighting with swords. Rendon Harvey was a mid-level swordsman. The students believed that someone without talent could not defeat Rendon. All Rendon wanted was for Theo to apologize, and then there would be no duel. Theo Ragnar was a fencing student. The boy decided to tell Randon that if he didn't want to remain a one-armed fencer, he'd better just quit. Theo's words angered Randon. The scoundrel wanted to turn a blind eye, but Randon's pride would not allow him to do so. He decided to simply destroy the young man and pretend that it was an accident. Randon decided to give in and let Theo attack first. Theo decided not to pass up such an opportunity. Everyone watched the duel with bated breath. As expected, the fool lost. He really didn't know how to swing a sword. Randon began to mock Theo. He believed that Theo was no match for a mid-level fencer. Theo Ragnar was not even a low-level fencer. He had noticed that Theo's skills had improved remarkably recently, but it wasn't enough to defeat him. If Theo had been at least at the level of 4 northern hounds, it would have been a completely different story. After Evelyn challenged him to a sword duel, Theo immediately followed her into the room. Evelyn was wondering what she had done, but Evelyn assured Theo that she had helped him. If Theo wanted to get rid of Randon, he needed to approach it more carefully. It seemed that Randon had a patron, so dismissal would not be enough. Theo looked at Evelyn in surprise, not understanding how she knew. Evelyn constantly watched the training sessions and noticed that Randon was teaching Theo strange techniques, so Evelyn sent someone to follow Randon. She didn't understand where the scoundrel Randon had come from. In her past life, Evelyn hadn't been interested in this, so it seemed that the power of the palace had made Evelyn interested in everything that was happening between Theo and Randon. Evelyn's investigation led her to the Palace of Camellias. Theo found it hard to believe that a pathetic struggle for the throne was the cause of it all. Of course, it was great that Evelyn found out about it, but with his limited abilities, Theo still couldn't defeat Randon. But Evelyn assured Theo that he was simply underestimating himself. He had the strength to defeat Randon. Rondon began to attack the boy. He assured Theo that if the boy got down on his knees right now and begged for mercy, maybe Rondon would stop. But Theo was able to deflect Rondon's sword. Only now did Randon realize that something was wrong. Theo was blocking all of his attacks. Randon couldn't understand how Theo had become so strong. Everyone present was surprised that Theo was fending off all attacks except for Evelyn's. She knew much more about Theo than the others. Evelyn offered to train Theo. If he trained all week, he would be able to defeat someone like Randon. If Theo started ignoring his teacher and training with another teacher, it would break the rules. But Randon was a scoundrel and had no right to call himself a teacher. Theo was glad that circumstances had turned out in such a way that he was able to enlist Evelyn's support. But Theo didn't understand why Evelyn was going to such lengths. Was it really just because of that one incident? But that wasn't the only reason. Evelyn knew someone who would like Theo. This man was obsessed with collecting talent. The duel continued. Randon couldn't stop thinking about how Theo could fend off his attacks if he was just a young fool. It was impossible for Theo to pretend to be so unlucky all the time. Theo decided to ask who was behind Randon, but this question only angered Randon even more. Did Randon really think that Theo didn't understand that he was learning nonsense? Randon began to refute the boy's words, but Theo interrupted him, mentioning only the Camellia Palace. But Randon just looked at the young man in surprise. He couldn't understand how the boy had found out. Theo became curious to know if Randon knew how to get rid of an arm. After that, the boy, without a moment's hesitation, cut off one of Randon's hands. Now, Theo knew for sure that he had become stronger, and he could become even stronger. Last time, Randon told Theo that all the horror that had happened was his fault. So Randon's death was the fault of this scoundrel. As soon as Theo destroyed Randon, a blue screen appeared. It displayed congratulations on successfully completing the quest. For completing the quest, Theo was to receive an additional reward. So all he had to do was agree to accept the reward. Of course, Theo agreed. Everyone was shocked by the fight. It was hard to believe that Theo, a student, could defeat his teacher, Randon. Theo looked at Randon. In the past, Theo had constantly suffered at the hands of Randon. From now on, everything would change. As a reward, Theo received the gift of observation, but he did not understand what this ability was. As an additional reward, Theo received magical powers for 1 year. A demonic dragon named Julius Ragnar, captain of the dragon riders in white armor, appeared before Theo. But what he wanted from Theo was not yet clear. Only Evelyn understood what was happening. Julius damaged the covering. Evelyn couldn't understand why he didn't just come in normally. Theo looked fearfully at Julius as he approached him. At that moment, Theo desperately wanted someone to explain what was happening and what he had done. Julius began to praise the boy and said he was surprised that the student had surpassed his teacher. Of course, Julius considered destroying a teacher disrespectful, but knowing Randon's actions, he clearly deserved it. Theo continued to look at Julius in amazement. But no one would touch Randon. Julius had come to this duel today to offer Theo a place in the Dragon Rider squad. Every student was surprised by what they heard. It seemed that anger had overcome each of them. It simply could not be that a fool would become a Dragon Rider. Axiom decided to ask Remington if he knew of even one case where a novice swordsman who had not even passed the ceremony had been accepted into the Knights. Of course, there were no such cases. It is impossible to assess someone's abilities before the gates of mana open. Even if you are a skilled swordsman, magical powers may not be enough. No matter how great Julius Ragnar was, he couldn't be completely sure of Theo, although maybe the demonic dragon saw some potential in the boy. Everyone dreamed of joining the Dragon Riders, but Theo Ragnar decided to turn down the offer. Everyone was shocked by his refusal and began to discuss Theo. Theo was given an opportunity that everyone could only dream of, but Theo refused, saying that he was not skilled enough. What exactly is impossible to observe every day? Lady Camellia Emil Ragnar was very unhappy that Theo had destroyed Randon. She found it hard to believe. The Sky Dragon Ed Troyven asked Emil not to be upset about Rendo. Moreover, Emil found Rendo's abilities disgusting, so the death of someone like him did not deserve their attention. Emil reported that there were rumors that Evelyn had proposed the duel. This meant that the Camellia Palace could not appoint a new teacher. All that worried Emil was that Theo might start to stand out, and the Rose Palace would be difficult to control. But Emil was assured that the clan leader had no interest in what was happening, so everything was going according to plan. Everyone present in the Camellia Palace had to understand that in order to get the Rose Palace, they must not arouse the clan leader's suspicion. To do this, Theo had to remain weak. Axiom was sure that Theo was still weak, as he could not have changed much. Evelyn and Julius had always been interested in losers. If his mother and uncle were so worried about Theo, then Axiom decided to play with them a little. Axiom decided to show Theo his place. Evelyn also decided to praise Theo, but Theo himself believed that without such a wonderful teacher as Evelyn, he would never have succeeded. Evelyn also thought it would be great if Theo joined the Dragon Riders. She wondered why Theo had turned down the offer. In his past life, Theo had dreamed of being a knight in white armor, and to say that he didn't regret turning down the offer would be untrue, but it was too early to join them. When Theo thought about all the privileges that would come his way after the awakening ceremony, joining the Dragon Riders was incomparable. Evelyn was fascinated by Theo's modesty. While training Theo, she felt a surge of strength for the first time. Of course, Evelyn missed the knights in white armor very much. Thanks to his powers of observation, Theo was able to notice all this in Evelyn. This ability would definitely come in handy in the future. Theo and Evelyn's conversation was interrupted by Sybil Drea, who had arrived from the southern observation island. Sybil urgently wanted to discuss something with Theo. This seemed suspicious to Theo. Theo decided to use his powers of observation. It really was Sybil Drea. He was a swordsman apprentice with a talent for loyalty. He wanted to fight Theo. Neither Theo nor Evelyn expected this. The final training quest had begun. Theo had to get rid of his nickname, Ragnar the Fool. Sybil decided to explain that he just wanted to follow you, Mr. Theo. Previously, Sybil had paid no attention to Theo and thought that the nickname Dim-Witted Ragnar suited Theo very well. Theo considered Sybil a scoundrel, but Sybil continued to speak. He learned that Theo went to training every morning and that the boy trained harder than all the other students. As a result, Sybil noticed a remarkable increase in Theo's strength. Theo became Sybil's idol. As it turned out, Sybil began to be called a fool from the observation post. Sybil thought about giving up, but then Theo appeared before him. Sybil asked for permission to fight Theo. This request surprised Theo and Evelyn. Previously, Theo would have refused, but not now. The quest had to be completed. Theo Ragnar was a swordsman apprentice at the Palace of Roses. He was preparing for the awakening ceremony. His teacher was Evelyn Nereville. Therefore, Theo asked Evelyn to give him time to fight Sybil. Sybil Drea was a student of the Southern Watchtower swordsman. He was the heir to the sword-wielding art of the Kurai clan. He was a master of the quick sword. Enough talk. It was time to start the duel. Sybil decided to strike first. Theo noticed that Sybil was fast, but he still managed to parry every attack. Although Sybil was considered a fool at the Southern Lookout Post, he was confident in his speed. Sybil thought Theo was truly remarkable. Theo couldn't understand why Sybil was considered a fool. In a past life, Theo had long ago lost a duel to Sybil's blows. But in this life, Theo would not lose for anything. He struck Sybil so hard that the boy flew to the side and dropped his sword. Sybil looked at Theo with a smile. Everything happened exactly as he had expected. Sybil lost, Theo won. Theo accidentally saw his reflection in the sword and realized that he could use his observation skill on himself. He eagerly awaited the awakening ceremony. He had reached the first level. Theo's characteristics were Strength 13, Agility 14, and Magical Power 190. Observing his abilities, Theo realized that his talent was his ability. By completing quests, Theo would be able to unlock 4 more talents. Theo understood perfectly well that his magical power was high thanks to the dragon's heart, but he did not understand why his luck was -49. Was Theo cursed because he had no luck in his past life? He had to find a way to increase his luck. Theo noticed that students were starting to gather behind him, but he didn't understand what they wanted. Sybil couldn't keep quiet. He began to insist that Rendon was a weakling, even though he was a middle-ranking swordsman. Young Lord Theo was able to defeat him and even win the commander's approval. There were 2 possible reactions from the Ragnar clan to Theo's victory. The first option was that they would envy Theo. The second option was that they would begin to admire him. And of course, all the students present would undoubtedly choose the second option. The Ragnar clan noticed the duel between Sybil and Theo. Everyone present was convinced that the rumors were true. Everyone started talking about the duel, but there was one boy who also wanted to fight Theo. Eod Naran was a low-ranking swordsman. Passion and determination were Eod's talents. Theo said Eod Naran's name. The boy looked at Theo in surprise. Did Theo know him? But Theo did not answer the question. He simply asked Eod to step forward so that they could begin the duel. This duel was important to Eod Naran. Therefore, Eod decided to tell a little about himself. He was the third son of the Naran family. Eod studied the art of double sword wielding. Theo Ragnar from the Palace of Roses simply hoped for a good duel. In this duel, Theo was able to improve his sword skills. The duel turned out to be really interesting. The young men skillfully wielded their swords. Eod was able to swing his sword so that it seemed that Theo was about to lose. But at the last moment, Theo was able to parry the blow. It was the decisive blow. Eod's sword fell from his hands. This meant that Eod had lost the duel. Theo received a notification that he now had Eod's favor and was able to increase his luck by 1 point. Theo realized that the favor of others increased his luck, so he decided to continue the duels. So Theo began a duel with Banata Ramiro, but Banata also lost. As soon as Theo defeated him, he immediately gained Banata's favor. The same thing happened in the duel with Eric Morana. Indeed, Theo's luck increased with each new victory in a duel. In one day, Theo fought many fights and won every one of them. But in addition to his victories, his sword skills improved and his luck also increased. Theo wanted to continue the fight, but there were no takers. On the blue screen, Theo noticed that his quest progress had only increased by 1%, but Theo couldn't understand why this was the case. Perhaps it was because all these people treated Theo well. To complete the quest, it seemed that he had to fight those who despised Theo. Theo accidentally overheard one student expressing concern for another's well-being. Although the other student responded rudely, Theo watched them in surprise. The Silver Lion Remington Narcio stood before Theo. He asked Theo to fight him. This was very unexpected for Theo. Remington was one of the 4 hounds of the North. Theo was very curious why Remington decided to fight. Was it out of curiosity, or did he have some personal motive? The 4 northern hounds included Hulkus Lenk, Ray Ragnar, Remington Narcio, and Axion Ragnar from the Camellia Palace. This was the title held by the 4 strongest men of the current generation of the Ragnar clan at the Awakening ceremony. Remington said he had come early to watch Lord Ragnar's sword skills before the Awakening ceremony. Theo decided to use his observation skills again. Remington was the younger head of the Narcio clan. He was a sword apprentice. Remington was an amazing swordsman, insightful and extremely determined. Remington was surprised by the unexpected appearance of his opponent. Theo Ragnar was the 3rd son of the great defender of the North, Kyle Ragnar. Theo could not have imagined that he would meet a sword genius in this way. Theo was very nervous about this duel. Remington was not just a student, he was awakened. The battle was sure to be interesting. Their swords crossed in battle. Theo's only goal was to defeat Remington. If he could do it before completing the quest, he would become greater. Remington struck too hard. Theo's sword broke like a glass accidentally dropped from a height, but the young man still managed to parry Remington's blow. Theo's supporters were very surprised that everything happened this way. They refused to believe that the boy had lost. But no matter how strong Theo was, he was fighting one of the 4 hounds of the North. The students who watched the fight were sure that Theo could never defeat the strongest swordsman of this generation. But Theo's fighting spirit was truly incredible. Theo was hurt that he had lost the fight. Remington sincerely thanked the young man for the fight and told him that his sword was completely useless. Remington also noticed that the boy was tired, which was his fault. But Theo was sure that there was no place for pity on the battlefield. He lost this duel as soon as he lost his sword. Remington hoped for a more interesting duel in the future and shook young Theo's hand. The boy also hoped for another duel with him. It was quite unexpected for the others that one of the 4 hounds recognized Theo. Sybil was convinced from the very beginning that Theo was not as simple as he seemed. The task was increased to 35%. With such success, Theo had every chance of getting rid of his nickname, Ragnar the Fool. Theo noticed that with his new talent, he had become much stronger than in his past life. But when Theo's sword touched Remington's sword, he realized that he was still weak. Of course, Theo was sad that it had ended this way, but it was a valuable experience for him. Besides, his luck rating had increased by 10, and his reputation had grown quite well. Theo was sorry that the task had not progressed very far. There had to be another way to earn favor. He just had to find it. Remington interrupted Theo's thoughts. He had come to the Palace of Roses not only to fight the young Theo. The boy looked at Remington in surprise, not even guessing what he wanted from him. Remington handed Theo an envelope. He wanted to invite the boy to join the Scaled Dragon Society. Sybil was simply shocked by what he heard. This was a high society club for the select few. It seemed that Sybil envied Theo and wanted to be in his place. But Theo was just as shocked. He couldn't even imagine that someone like him would be invited to join this society. So Theo wondered if it was okay that Remington had invited him. This question confused Remington. He believed that Theo was truly more suitable than anyone else, especially since this was not just any group. Theo's peers were also candidates for the Awakening ceremony, so they also wanted invitations. Some students even cried when they heard the news. Theo didn't understand why Remington invited him, but Dragon Society was centered around Axion. There were quite a few scoundrels there who were just waiting for a chance to destroy Theo. It was the perfect opportunity to complete the task. Moreover, it was a great idea to learn more about Axion and the Camellia Palace. So Theo decided to agree and accepted Remington's invitation. Everyone present was surprised that Theo had been accepted into the Society of the Scaly Dragons. A little later, in the Palace of Roses, Theo heard his mother's cry. He had wanted to tell her that he had been accepted into the Society of the Scaly Dragons, but he didn't have time. His mother just wanted to tidy her son up. She was delighted that her son had been invited to join the Scaled Dragons. This society included Axion, the son of the cunning Emil, and the talented Remington. Cecilia explained to her son that she was even glad they were paying attention to them. They evaluated everything from appearance to behavior. Of course, Cecilia knew that Theo's manners were perfect, but his clothes and behavior left something to be desired. But Cecilia could help Theo with that because she used to be an actress and knew perfectly well how to behave in society. Cecilia was happy to help her son. Theo was the illegitimate son of a commoner. Cecilia always felt guilty for giving her son such a title, even though it wasn't her fault. Of course, Theo could imagine how difficult it was for his mother to live in the cold clan of Ragnar with such an unfortunate son. Cecilia believed in Theo. She knew that her son could do anything. Theo assured his mother that they had nothing to worry about. He simply knew that he would destroy this society. 2 weeks passed. The day of the banquet in the Society of the Scaly Dragon arrived. Of course, Theo was also invited to this banquet. Theo was accompanied to the banquet not only by his mother, but by the entire palace. Cecilia had indeed managed to clean up her son in the last 2 weeks. Standing in front of the palace was not a rowdy boy, but a truly respectable lord. Remington was shocked by Theo's appearance. He didn't even immediately realize that it was young Theo. The boy smiled sweetly. Theo thought Remington was just joking. But Remington was sincere. Theo had not only grown taller, but he had also gained some muscle. This was the result of 2 weeks of intense training. Remington came to the Rose Palace every day for 2 weeks to train with Theo. The boy thought they had become friends. Theo also trained constantly with other students who were imitating the young Theo. Evelyn just wanted to teach the young boy, but someone was always interrupting their training. She couldn't understand how it had come to this. Theo, as always, was lost in his memories and thoughts. But Remington interrupted his reverie. It was Theo's first time attending an official banquet, so Remington decided to calm the boy down and assure him that everything would be fine. Although Remington's friend Axion was very unpleasant. But it was the same Axion who had invited Remington to meet with Theo. Remington was very hopeful that the young man would be sensible. Remington also said that today's banquet was organized just for Theo. The boy was surprised that it was actually Axion who invited him, not Remington. Everything was going perfectly. Theo knew for sure that he was not expected with open arms. Axion Ragnar, one of the 4 hounds of the north, was indeed a very unpleasant person. He despised Theo and considered him his new toy. Finally, they arrived at the banquet. Theo didn't really know how today would go or what to expect from Axion. Theo stood near the Camellia Palace and just stared at it. He knew that behind these walls were those who had sent Randon to interfere with Theo's training, those who had destroyed his mother's Rose Palace and then Theo himself. Action was supposed to come out personally to greet Theo, so he had to wait for them at the entrance. Theo guessed that Action had invited him only because Theo had proven himself. That meant it was time to ruin Theo's life. But Axion knew nothing about Theo, just as he didn't know that the boy also had a plan. In one of the windows, Theo noticed a blue light. Could it be the light from the task? Remington explained that everything was right inside the Camellia Palace. Theo walked a little faster. Behind him, he heard Remington scream. Something fell out of the window and landed right on Theo. Remington was seriously afraid for the young man. It was pure torture. Theo assured Remington that everything was fine, but Theo knew very well that in his past life, he would hardly have been able to dodge it. Remington started yelling at whoever had done it. Theo used his powers of observation. What he saw pleasantly surprised him. As it turned out, Remington had nothing to do with what had happened. He was just as shocked as Theo. Axion appeared behind Theo. He asked him not to be angry and to consider it just a brotherly greeting. Theo didn't waste any time and immediately used his powers of observation. Action was Theo's peer. His title was Dark Leopard. Action was also a sword fighter. His talents included madness, excellent sword skills, and Action was a cruel man who wanted to play with his new toy. Theo simply smiled and thanked him for his hospitality. Axion was shocked. This was not what he had expected. Theo said that he had been looking forward to tonight's banquet. Action also smiled at Theo. He thought the young man had become even more amusing since they last saw each other. The other guests were very unhappy with Axion's decision to invite Theo into their society, even if he was from a higher branch of the clan. But inviting a weirdo into Dragon Society was too much. Although Theo looked pretty good, everyone understood perfectly well that Theo was just a toy for Axion. Remington decided to apologize again for the boy's behavior and explain that they had never behaved like that before, but Theo assured him that nothing terrible had happened. On the contrary, he was grateful to them. Let them gossip. The time would come when Theo would take revenge on everyone. Theo noticed the blue light again. He was sure that it was a task, but how could he get into the room to see? Axion appeared before Theo again. With a smile on his face, he decided to ask if Theo was enjoying the banquet. Axion also decided to apologize for his behavior. In reality, Theo had never liked Axion, but he had a plan that he had to stick to. So, smiling at his enemy, he assured him that everything was fine and thanked him for the invitation. But that wasn't enough for Axion. He approached Theo, hugged him, and asked again if the young man accepted his apology. Theo just looked at Axion in surprise. He pretended not to understand what apology he was talking about if it was just a greeting. At first, Axion looked at Theo in surprise, then laughed loudly, assuring him how much he had changed and how funny he had become. The other boys looked at Theo with envy. They considered him worse than them. Although the young men were Ragnars, the gap between them was very noticeable. The envious young men believed that it was not worth comparing the noble clan of the Troivons from the east with a random woman who had appeared out of nowhere. But they couldn't understand why Remington cared so much about him. But if you think about it, Remington also had strange family roots. The mention of his family made Remington very sad. He asked the others to watch what they said. Talking about Remington's family was forbidden. Theo wanted to watch a little longer but changed his mind. He wanted to say hello to his new friends. Approaching the table, Theo took a bottle of wine. Everyone around thought that Theo just wanted to pour the boy some wine. For a few seconds, Theo just stared at the boy. The boy did not understand Theo's behavior. Had he said something wrong? Theo simply swung and hit the young man in the face with the bottle. Not only those present at the banquet were in shock, but Theo himself. But time cannot be turned back, and what is done is done. The boy got up and, after calling Theo a freak, lunged at him. But Theo was enraged by what he had been called. He easily struck the boy again. Theo had only greeted him, but the young man immediately started throwing punches. Those present at the banquet began to doubt that Theo was weak. The fourth task was 43% complete. Remington knew that young Theo would never have done such a thing. Only now did Remington realize that Theo had decided to stand up for him. Theo had greeted the boy, and now he wanted to say goodbye to him. Theo broke the boy's arm. After that, his task was 58% complete. He wondered if anyone else wanted to say hello to him. 4 boys took out their swords and pointed them at Theo. Theo was supposed to die for attacking the young boy. Everything was going according to Theo's plan. This boy was the 3rd master of the Hanavi clan, Jan Hanavi. Now Theo understood everything. He was one of the 6 allies of the Ragnar clan, the Hanavi clan. Of course, these guys weren't just going to sit there and watch while Theo acted like a fool. But Theo told them that dogs like them had no right to demand the destruction of Theo Ragnar. Theo assured them that he would not tolerate such disrespect. But would the boys be able to deal with the consequences of their words? The guys felt pressure, but they didn't understand where it was coming from. Each of these young men began to doubt that this was the same worthless Ragnar. Although, to tell the truth, Theo was the direct heir to the Ragnar clan and a candidate for the throne. Moreover, Ragnar was the ruler of the north and the head of the 6 snow clans. Threatening to destroy one of the heirs was a sin for which the destruction of an entire clan was a trifle. Previously, this did not apply to Theo, but not now. The boys thought it would be better to apologize to Theo, but Theo himself thought it would be better to destroy them. Perhaps this scene would have continued for some time if 4 boys had not been killed with a single blow. Evelyn seemed to have decided to come to the aid of her student. Theo was very grateful to Evelyn for her help. He could now calmly play all his trump cards. Julius was not slow to act either. Opening a bottle of wine, he immediately started talking to Evelyn. There was a time when Evelyn said she would no longer take students, but for some reason she started teaching Theo. So Julius became curious about her new student. Until Evelyn left, Julius was always out on the street. Did he really have nothing else to do? Julius wanted Evelyn to be happy for him at least once in her life. He waited for her answer. Evelyn assured him that Theo had exceeded all her expectations. Evelyn assured him that Theo was the best student she had ever taught. Julius was surprised. Axion was also her student. Could Theo really be better than Axion? Evelyn knew exactly what Theo was capable of. That's why she was so confident in her words. Julius knew that people don't change that much. It seemed that Theo had simply been hiding his talents. But Evelyn found it rather strange that Theo, who had hidden his talents, was now displaying them so ostentatiously. Haste never led to anything good, and Evelyn knew that very well. She watched Theo. Evelyn had the feeling that someone was constantly pushing the boy. That's why she was worried about Theo joining the community of the Scaly Dragon. Julius felt that something was about to happen, but he didn't know what. Although maybe he was wrong about Theo. Before leaving, Julius asked Evelyn to talk to Theo about joining the Dragon Riders. He said that it concerned Evelyn as well. Had Evelyn really decided to leave just because she couldn't sit on a dragon? Julius wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted Evelyn to come back and take Theo under her wing. Evelyn began to think that Theo had noticed her following him. That was probably why he put on such a show. Maybe that was why he joined the Scaly Dragons. She shouldn't have started worrying about him. But Evelyn still couldn't figure out when Theo had realized. This young man seemed unpredictable to Evelyn. Theo explained to Evelyn that he had known everything from the moment he got into the carriage. Evelyn just looked at him in surprise. Theo explained that he had a 6th sense. Anyone who possessed the heart of a dragon could easily sense the energy of others. But in front of everyone in the hall, Theo pretended to be surprised by her appearance. Evelyn revealed something that shocked everyone. Many of those present showed disrespect to the candidate for the throne. Those who showed disrespect had to be punished somehow. According to the rules of the clan, those who showed disrespect to the heir were to be destroyed immediately. Since they were just children, Theo decided to punish them by cutting off one of their hands. The young men begged him to stop and not do this. One of them approached Axion and asked him to save him, but he refused, explaining that it was just a greeting. Axion could never have imagined that he would meet Evelyn under such circumstances. Evelyn simply greeted him. Axion realized that Theo had done everything so that even he had no right to speak ill of him. All Axion wanted was to get rid of Theo. It was time for Emily, Theo, and Remington to leave the Camellia Palace. Theo told Axion goodbye and said he had fun. Remington seemed a little afraid of Theo. The 4th training quest was successfully completed. All the training quests had been successfully completed. Now no one could call Theo a dim-witted Ragnar anymore. Of course, Theo was happy to have completed the tasks, but the real revenge was yet to begin. For the last quest, Theo received a potion of experience as a reward. What could be better than experience? After the banquet, Amelia was immediately informed of everything. She found it hard to believe what she had just heard. Everyone who was a fan of Theo decided to celebrate his successful debut. Just recently, the young man had been alone, but today he was surrounded by his admirers. The Palace of Camellia. Immediately after the latest news, Amalia called Axion to her. She was very angry. Not only had Axion called Theo to them, but he had also allowed people to be maimed. Amelia did not understand what her son was thinking. She had asked Axion many times to be more serious. He had to forget about subjugating Theo because the boy had started doing whatever came into his head. Amelia had said many times that if the worthless Theo Ragnar began to stand out, it would be more difficult for them to capture the Palace of Roses. But Axion was sure that they had nothing to worry about. As a result, before Axion left, Amelia told him that he should think about how he almost ruined their plan because of his empty whim. Amelia did not understand where her son had gotten his character from, but she was assured that Axion's character resembled Amelia's when she was young. The whole situation was to their advantage, so there was no need to be angry. The Palace of Roses was part of the clan leader's harem, so capturing it was certainly difficult. Although the leader was not particularly interested in the gathering of scoundrels, he still provided them with financial support. All these scoundrels needed was proof. Fortunately for them, Theo caused a commotion at the Scaly Dragon's banquet. Theo slowly but surely became a representative of the Palace of Roses. Therefore, all that remained was to use this childish game as an opportunity and bring Theo to justice according to the laws of the clan. Amelia was surprised by such a wonderful plan. Amelia was very worried that Theo's rapid rise in power would draw the attention of the Rose Palace and ruin all their plans. But the new plan was better. Thanks to it, it would be easy to conquer the Palace of the Trojans. Amelia was curious about only one thing: how much time was needed to prepare. But she was assured that everything was already prepared. Tomorrow morning, they would hear wonderful news. Remington could never have imagined that Theo would stand up for him. Theo did not understand what he was talking about. Remington explained that he was talking about the community of scaly dragons. Theo looked at him in surprise. Could Remington have gotten drunk on juice? But Remington continued talking. When they spoke insultingly about Theo, he just stood there, but as soon as they started talking about Remington, Theo immediately stood up for him. Remington was ashamed that he had done nothing. Theo had endured a time when everyone looked down on him and saw him as a useless child. But he had grown up to be a strong man. Even against such a strong opponent as Axion, Theo was able to win. Against the Camellia Palace, before which everyone trembled, Theo drew his sword without even a tremor. Remington sincerely believed that Theo did it for him. Theo used his powers of observation and noticed that Remington believed that someone cared about him. Remington's clan entrusted him with establishing contact with Axion. But after the banquet, Remington had the idea to follow Theo Ragnar. Theo was pleasantly surprised. All of Theo's supporters had been waiting for this. The strong always stuck together. But Theo decided to explain everything to Remington because the boy had misunderstood. But just as he began to speak, Evelyn stopped Theo with telepathy. Evelyn thought there was nothing wrong with Remington's idea. Besides, Evelyn noticed that everyone present just wanted to be friends with Theo. It was strange for Theo to hear that someone wanted to be friends with him, because before no one even paid attention to him. Was it all because of the awakening? Theo noticed that after returning from the palace, his level had increased to the second level. Theo was a little scared. He didn't know what the future held for him when he became strong enough. Evelyn looked at the boy in surprise. It was hard for Theo to understand. The Camellia Palace would definitely not leave Theo alone, and the young man understood this perfectly well. So if Remington wanted to follow him, Theo decided to ask him for help. The boy really liked that Theo called him Remy. Of course, Remington would be happy to help Theo. Theo explained that a war for the throne between him and Axion was about to begin. Hard times were coming. So Theo asked Remington to prepare for war. In the future, Remington was to become the head of the Narcio clan. With its strength and power, the Narcio clan would be able to stand up to the Ragnar clan. Therefore, Theo had to win Remington over to his side. Remington agreed without hesitation to help Theo because he had decided to follow him. The cozy evening was interrupted by uninvited guests, the Swords of Justice. They came to arrest Theo for intimidation, physical violence, and blackmail. Everyone was shocked by such accusations. Theo approached one of the Swords of Justice and began to examine the warrant. The warrant was genuine. The ink was still wet. It was immediately apparent that they were in a hurry. Remington and Evelyn stood there and watched in amazement as Theo was taken away in handcuffs. They wanted to help but didn't know how. The next morning, Cecilia was immediately informed that Theo had been arrested. Cecilia felt sick when she heard the news. She couldn't believe that her son had been taken away. Cecilia said she was fine and asked for an explanation of what had happened. They told her everything Theo was accused of. Cecilia really hoped that it wouldn't reach the council. Because of Theo, the dragon community had fallen apart, and they would not let it go so easily. Therefore, the news would most likely reach the council. Cecilia could not understand how this could have happened, but she believed that her Theo would be able to handle it. Theo rode in a carriage to the council house. How long had it been since he had been there? Theo understood perfectly well that after what had happened in the dragon community, he would not get off with a light punishment. He would be judged harshly. If Theo appeared before the council, he would have to prove that he was worthy of being the heir to the Ragnar clan. Theo believed that this time, they would see it through to the end. Everything was going according to plan. As soon as the doors of the council house opened, the guards immediately reported that Theo Ragnar had been brought in. Theo believed that such a scene suited him. He was ready to show what he was capable of. He stood before the council. Such an audience satisfied Theo. Julius Ragnar, captain of the demonic horsemen in white armor, was one of the council members. 4 of the 9 dragons who protected Ragnar. The sky dragon Ed Troyven, head of the intelligence service. In the past, Theo couldn't even look them in the eye. The graceful dragon Osa Ragnar, lady of the palace of flowering plums. The wise dragon Wolfen Ragnar, head of the council. Theo greeted the members of the council. He did not expect his first meeting with the head of the council to happen like this. Wolfgang didn't like half-breeds like Theo. You could see in his eyes how much he despised the boy. Theo appeared before the council because of his foolish prank. The Byron clan, the Ceres Merchant Guild, the Red and White Mercenary Organization, and even the Hanavi clan all wanted to sever ties with the Ragnar clan. Wolfgang was very angry with Theo. He promised that Theo would pay for all his actions. Because of his behavior, he had ruined the honor of the Ragnar clan. Theo admitted that Wolfgang was right. Instead of what Theo did at the banquet, he should have simply destroyed them all. The council clearly did not expect to hear this from Theo. The young man began to explain that those people were mere subordinates. The Lord grants land and mercy, and his servants grant loyalty until the end of their days. That was the way of knighthood. But they dared to question the Lord's words. Theo was furious. If he had known they would show such disrespect, he would have destroyed them immediately. According to the principles of knighthood, they must be punished immediately. Could Theo just stand by and watch their clan be dragged through the mud? Julius was very pleased with the boy. He knew that the young man would be able to get himself out of this. Wolfgang shouted angrily for the young man to stop talking nonsense. Osha Ragnar also heard the boy. In some ways, she agreed with Theo. She decided to explain to Theo that this was not the only reason. If they did not listen to their vassals and knights, their clan would quickly fall. Because power alone was not enough to rule the world, Theo decided to remember Osha Ragnar's words. The Dragon Sword was the first female clan chief and the best swordsman in the north. The council hoped that Theo understood that a severe punishment awaited him, 3 months of imprisonment. But the awakening ceremony was to take place very soon. Wolfgang began to shout angrily at Theo to stop arguing with him. Osa Ragnar would allow him to participate next year. Thanks to the demonic dragon who stood up for Theo, his sentence was reduced. Ed, on the contrary, was delighted. It was even better this way. Such a sentence was a disgrace to the Ragnar clan. After the sentence, the Palace of Roses posed no threat, and it would be much easier to capture it. And if Theo started to contradict them, they would simply have to destroy him. And Theo objected. He did not agree with the punishment. The 3 council members looked at the boy with great surprise. Only Ed was happy about Theo's stupidity. Of course, Theo understood perfectly well what he was doing. He received the lightest punishment. To him, it seemed as if he had simply been scolded. Apparently, the demonic dragon had tried very hard. In the powerful Ragnar clan, Theo's words meant the beginning of war. Theo didn't need handouts from the council. In the end, history is always written by the victors. The main storyline was open, where Theo would be able to uncover many secrets of this world. The first quest of the storyline was the Path of the Air. The Ceres Merchants Guild is a secret northern branch. Evelyn and Rankton went to this guild on Theo's behalf. The Camellia Palace, ruled by the Troivens, will be destroyed. Theo was very lucky that he would not be alone in this war. The council was surprised by Theo's behavior. Wolfgang began to rage. How dare a little boy contradict the council? Wolfgang couldn't understand how Theo didn't realize that he was only making the situation worse. Had he really decided to declare war? Did Theo really believe that he could stand alone against all the clans? The council could not comprehend this decision. Of course, the council did not know what Theo knew. Because of the events of the past, the young man had no other choice. Moreover, Theo knew that in a situation where the forces were unequal, the Ragnar clan had the right to choose their opponent. Usually, when there was an appeal against a punishment imposed by the council, the dispute was settled by war. But in cases where one of the participants had a clear advantage, each side sent one participant to determine the winner in a sword fight. Each side sent one participant to determine the winner in a sword fight. This was a representative duel. It was almost immediately clear that Theo would be the representative of the defense. The other side would most likely be represented by Axion. Julius understood that if Theo fought Axion, he would lose in any case. So why offer an option where the boy could not be the winner, unless Theo had some kind of trump card up his sleeve? If Theo hoped that someone else would fight in his place, that would not happen. According to the law, a representative had to be chosen, and the duel had to take place in a week. The scoundrel Ed understood that Theo was up to something. The same thought crossed his mind as Julius. The boy would ask someone else to fight in his place, but Ed was sure that Theo would not run away from the duel. The head of the clan, Kyle Ragnar, entered the council chamber. He considered his son to be a quiet child, but he had seen how skillfully Theo manipulated people. Theo had changed a lot since his last meeting with his father. Every member of the council immediately stood up to bow to the chief representative of the Ragnar clan. Theo also bowed to the great dragon god, his father. At that moment, a blue screen appeared in front of Theo with quest number 1. It was about capturing the Camellia Palace and solving its secret. Now Theo understood what the light in the palace was. Theo did not expect his father to appear. He began to fear that all his plans could now collapse in this hall. Kyle asked Theo to stand up. When Kyle returned home, he learned new information about Theo. It seemed to him that Theo was in a difficult situation. Kyle also knew that Theo wanted to appeal the council's decision. Theo confirmed that this was indeed the case. Kyle then informed him that he had a difficult task ahead of him. Who would Theo choose to represent him? Without hesitation, the young man said that he had no one to represent him. He would fight alone. But Kyle immediately replied that Theo would lose the fight. However, until Theo tried, they would not know for sure. The boy told his father that no one would make him bow his head. Kyle was very pleased that his son had such a strong character. He spoke like a true Ragnar, but for Theo, the duel was just a decoy. He had no intention of fighting. Before Theo was arrested, he asked Evelyn and Remington to find evidence of collusion at the Camellia Palace. If they found evidence, Theo would be able to win without a fight. Kyle Ragnar decided to test his son with just one blow, but Theo looked at his father in confusion. He didn't understand what kind of blow Kyle was talking about. His father set a condition for his son. If Theo could withstand his single blow, Kyle would drop all charges against the young man. But Ed didn't like this idea. The clan leader's decision angered Ed, so he immediately shouted that this couldn't be done. A test with one blow meant recognition of strength. Ed knew that if Theo passed the test, he would gain the clan leader's recognition. But he considered Theo a weakling, so he doubted that the boy could withstand a single blow. But if Theo did survive, he simply couldn't allow that to happen. So Ed continued to talk about how vassals and knights had no right to doubt Theo. The rules said that it was a duel between representatives. Kyle glared at Ed and ordered him to shut up. If a vassal allowed himself to behave so insolently, he simply had to be gotten rid of. Kyle noticed that the demonic dragon was smiling. If he had something to say, let him say it. But Julius simply said that he hadn't seen Kyle so interested in something in a long time. The clan chief Ragnar looked at his son again and asked if Theo was ready to withstand a single blow. The young man had not expected such a turn of events. His plan had fallen apart. But Theo believed that such changes were for the better. He told his father that he dared not compare his father's blow to a war against vassals and knights. Kyle looked at Theo in surprise. Was he really refusing? Of course, Theo wasn't refusing the blow, he just didn't think it would be a fair reward. The forces were unequal. Kyle became curious about what Theo wanted. For example, Theo wanted the Camellia Palace as a reward. Ed was shocked by the young man's words. He thought it was madness to ask the clan leader for such a reward. Wolfgang believed that Theo's pride would destroy him. Such an agreement was only possible if the forces were equal on both sides. Kyle agreed to give Theo the Camellia Palace. If Theo wanted to become the head of the clan, he had to be that resourceful. Kyle noticed that the Heavenly Dragon wanted to object, but Ed immediately changed his mind. The arena for Theo and Kyle's duel was prepared quickly. Everyone present went out to the arena to see if Theo Ragnar could withstand the blow. Ed was worried that the trap he had set for Theo would turn into a scene of his own promotion. However, it was too early to worry. The fact that the boy had become stronger did not mean that he would be able to withstand the blow. Even high-level swordsmen were not always able to withstand a blow from the clan leader. Theo knew that Ed was expecting him to die, but that wouldn't happen. Thanks to his latest reward for the 4th training quest, Theo was confident that he could survive. Had Theo drunk some kind of potion? Even if he had, such a rapid change was unlikely. It didn't matter to Kyle how strong Theo had become. The young man was only at the 2nd level. Even 9 dragons wouldn't notice him. Although it didn't matter, Theo was Kyle's flesh and blood. Normally, Kyle would have struck with his 2-handed sword, but Theo did not yet possess mana, so Kyle decided to strike with a blunt sword. If Theo had no objections, it was time to begin. Theo felt a strong pressure of fighting spirit. Kyle was surprised that the boy was still standing. Thanks to the elixir of experience, Theo's strength had tripled. He gained 5 levels and put all his stats into strength. Theo had an incredible feeling that he had become stronger than his past self. Theo was confident that he could withstand one blow from his father. Everyone present was shocked by what happened next. Kyle swung his sword and struck Theo. The boy managed to stay on his feet and withstand Kyle's blow. The young man's clothes were torn and the sword shattered into small pieces. Kyle had waited a long time for a worthy son. Ed clearly did not expect Theo to be able to withstand the blow. Julius was glad that Theo Ragnar had proven his innocence through his own will. The sudden quest of Kyle Ragnar's single blow was complete. As a reward, Theo received some equipment. Theo came to his senses and did not understand where he was. His mother was sitting next to him. After the trial, Theo lost consciousness. Cecilia began to scold Theo. He couldn't even imagine how worried she was about him losing consciousness from the blow to the head from the clan leader. Theo assured her that he was fine. Theo couldn't figure out where he was. Julius entered the room and explained that by order of the clan leader, the former lady of the Camellia Palace, Axion, and the head of the intelligence service had been removed from their posts. Theo was completely taken aback by this news. He sat there in shock, realizing that they were in the Camellia Palace. Theo completed the first task of the story quest. The Camellia Palace had been captured. The second task remained, to unravel the mystery of the Camellia Palace. Amelia was furious that she had been expelled. She couldn't understand how she, the rightful mistress of the Camellia Palace, could be forcibly expelled from her domain. The vassals tried to calm Lady Amelia down. Axion and Ed just watched Amelia's hysterics in silence. Ed told Axion that he must destroy Theo Ragnar. Axion explained that he had planned to cut off Theo's hands at the ceremony, but Ed explained that it was not his hands that needed to be cut off, but his head. Everything went wrong for Theo, but he liked the fact that he had taken control of the palace without using his trump card. In addition, Theo was delighted that after surviving a single blow, he was rewarded with equipment. Along with the inventory, Theo received a blue key that opened the dungeon. He knew that the key was for the door in front of him. As soon as Theo opened the door, he immediately noticed the dungeon behind it. Theo discovered the dungeon for the first time. Theo thought that this dungeon was a test. If he passed it, he would be rewarded with double the experience he gained in the dungeon. To make sure there was nothing in this dungeon, Theo decided to clear it out. The boy didn't want to lose the double experience, but he couldn't leave empty-handed. Taking his swords and shield with him, Theo set off for the dungeon. Theo wandered through the dungeon for quite a long time, but nothing interesting happened. Finally, Theo encountered a wolf. But this wolf was much larger than usual. This wolf resembled a demonic beast. The wolf attacked Theo. The boy managed to cover himself with his shield. The wolf seemed quite strong to Theo. But Theo was not inferior in strength. A fierce battle began between the wolf and the boy. Theo noticed that the wolf's skin was thick and that it was fast. This meant that it was not an ordinary wolf. Theo would have to give it his all. There were many such demons in the world of demons beyond the Northern Wall. It would be difficult to deal with them. Theo and the wolf attacked each other for a long time, until Theo decided to try his father's technique, which he had seen during a trial of one strike. But Theo failed. Of course, not everything came easily. Theo thought that such a blow probably required all of his strength. Letting go of his shield, Theo decided to use all the sword techniques that absorbed speed. He would also need to use the art Evelyn had taught him. That's exactly what Theo did. Thanks to this, he was able to wound the wolf. The beast became enraged and attacked the boy. Theo believed that he could destroy the beast. 2 months passed. The number of people at training ground number 4 had increased significantly. Some students began to consider changing their training ground. After rumors spread that Theo Ragnar had withstood a single blow from the clan chief, more and more people gathered at this training ground, wanting to fight Theo. Henry Morris was a student of the Blooming Plum Palace swordsman. He seemed arrogant and was waiting for Theo to show up. 2 months passed, but Theo was nowhere to be seen. Henry believed that no one skipped training. Henry's friend thought that Theo had simply run away because he was afraid that his lie would be exposed. There was a grain of truth in the boy's words, but there were no witnesses, which meant that it was just an exaggeration. Sybil stood up for Theo. He believed that compared to Theo, they were nobodies. The boys drew their swords and were ready to start the fight. But the fight was not meant to be. Ray Ragnar, the 4th Hound of the North, the Snow Leopard, appeared before them. He did not understand why he had not been invited to the festivities. Halcus Lank, the fourth hunter of the north, the black bear, also arrived at the fourth square with him. All the students were shocked that 2 hunters of the north had arrived. Halcus became curious about where the shining tiger was, but none of those present understood what he was talking about. Halcus was talking about the master of this square. Halcus arrived for a duel with Theo Ragnar. Theo was exhausted. He had defeated 170 demonic beasts. Thanks to this, he was able to raise his level to 15. Theo had been destroying demonic beasts for 2 months. Thanks to a healing potion, Theo quickly healed his wounds. At first, it was difficult for Theo to destroy the predators, but as his level increased, it became easier. There were a total of 171 predators in the dungeon. Theo destroyed 170 of them. Only 1 remained. This meant that Theo had to prepare for a battle with the boss. Theo's sword was broken and useless, so Theo opened his inventory to get a new sword. Theo had only 1 sword left. It was a ceremonial sword that his mother had given him for his birthday. In his past life, Theo had constantly quarreled with his mother, so he had left this sword to gather dust in his room. If you looked closely, it was a magnificent sword forged from white steel. Cecilia finally waited until midnight on that birthday to be the first to congratulate her son. The awakening ceremony was just around the corner, so Theo had no time for gifts. Theo kicked his mother out of the room, explaining that she knew better than him, a half-breed, and couldn't even clean a sword properly. But he wasn't going to repeat the mistakes of the past. Young Theo stood in front of the boss's room. There was a powerful demonic beast inside that needed to be treated with caution. Theo was shocked by what he saw. He expected a wolf to appear before him, but in this room was a dragon. This surprise angered Theo. The Ragnars were considered descendants of dragons. He was surprised that the final boss of this quest was a dragon. Theo did not think it was a coincidence, but if destroying the dragon was necessary to complete the quest, then so be it. He didn't know if he could defeat the dragon. He decided to use the one-hit technique, which he had already mastered thanks to his training with wolves. Theo struck the dragon, but he didn't know if it would be enough. Theo felt that he hadn't thrust his sword deep enough. Theo was not afraid of the dragon's roar because he knew where to strike. The boy was confident that he would win. The dragon began to use its ability to intimidate little Drake. This ability instilled fear in everyone present on the battlefield. This effect reduced the enemy's speed by 10%. Theo found it difficult to move. With one swipe of its paw, the dragon was able to throw Theo against the wall. No wonder they called him the boss. If the fight dragged on, this stage of Theo's life would be over. Theo decided to strike the dragon's weak spot. It was time to finish him off. The weak spot of dragons was the underside of their scales. It seemed that this blow had hit the weak spot, but the dragon opened its eyes and roared fiercely. While Theo fought the dragon in the dungeon on the 4th training ground, Halcus and Ray argued. They argued about who would be the first to fight Theo. Ray believed that a loser like Halcus should stay out of it. This greatly angered Halcus. 3 years passed. Their abilities improved every day, so 3 years was enough to close the gap. Halcus challenged Ray to another fight. The winner would get to fight Theo Ragnar. Those present at the arena did not understand what was happening, but everyone was scared. Only Ray and Halcus began the fight when Remington stopped them. He asked the boys to take their fight elsewhere, but fighting was not allowed on Theo's property in his absence. Halcus was glad to see Remington. Halcus also wanted to fight him. Remington couldn't understand that Halcus had gone deaf. Everyone froze in place. No one could understand where the destructive aura was coming from. Theo Ragnar appeared before them. It was a very strong pressure. Remington became curious about what Theo had been doing during his isolated training sessions to have such an aura. The dragon tried to knock Theo away when he got caught on the backside of its scales. Theo even thought that his end had come, but the boy still managed to defeat the dragon. Theo was very lucky that the dragon was exhausted and he struck it in its weak spot. As a reward, Theo received a tooth from the baby Drake and one of its claws. Little Drake's tooth improved weapons and his claw made them sharper. Theo decided to use them to repair his sword. After all, it was a gift from his mother. Theo also gained Drake's intimidation ability. This ability had a destructive aura. Theo found it hard to believe that he now had a new ability. The dungeon of the Kamalia Palace had been cleared, so Theo had nothing left to do here and it was time to return. Theo had also completed quest number 1. Theo also received a reward for completing the story quest. His reward was a compass to the nest. Theo began to examine the compass carefully, but couldn't figure out what it was for. Maybe it would come in handy for the next quest. After the battle with the dragon, Theo was very exhausted, so he needed to rest a little. As soon as Theo headed for his room, a servant caught up with him. It was urgent, but when she saw Theo, she looked at him in confusion. Theo explained that he had been running, and that was why he looked so terrible. The servant explained what had happened on the 4th platform, so Theo had to go there. It was a great opportunity to use his ability to intimidate. Theo used it to quickly sort things out on the platform and go rest. Hulk liked this destructive aura. Halcus wanted so badly to see how strong Theo was that he immediately attacked him. Theo easily blocked Hulk's blow. Everyone present was surprised at how strong Theo had become. Even Theo himself was surprised that he was able to block the blow. Halcus decided to attack again. He didn't want to lose. The black bear Halcus Lank was considered the weakest hunter in the north because he wasn't smart and didn't want to learn. But since Hulkus was from the Lank clan, no one could surpass him in strength. However, Hulkus could not even imagine how strong Theo Ragnar had become. With one blow, Theo was able to repel Halkus's attack and drive his sword into the ground. The level increase clearly played into Theo's hands. Theo won the fight because he put all his strength into one blow. He was lucky that Halkus was difficult to defeat and simply lost consciousness. Behind him, Theo heard joyful shouts. The young men rejoiced that Theo had been able to defeat one of the 4 hounds, the black bear, with a single blow. Theo tried to calm everyone down. Lank was still alive. Theo's sword was broken. Theo was angry that the sword his mother had given him was broken. Ray was transported back to her childhood memories. On that cold winter day, she found herself on the street wearing only a shirt. A boy met her on the street and was worried that she would freeze. To make her a little warmer, the boy gave Ray his scarf. Although the scarf didn't help much. The boy suggested that Ray go to his house and wait until the snow stopped. Then he would take her home. Ray smiled and decided to just leave. Remington was shocked. Ray Ragnar, who never smiled, had just smiled. That evening, the palace servants congratulated Theo on receiving the title of Brilliant Tiger. They believed that Theo deserved it. All this time, Theo had worked hard and gained great strength. It was worth continuing in the same vein because there was not much time left before the awakening ceremony. Theo's mother was very proud of her only son. She brought him shellfish that had been caught in the Icarius Sea, and then slowly fried in oil made only on a farm in the Finnish mountains. Cecilia fed Theo with a spoon as if he were a small child. Theo asked his mother to stop, but Cecilia did not seem to hear him. Although Theo began to get angry, he did not stop her. He remembered what had happened in his past life. Entering her son's room, Cecilia noticed a broken sword. She couldn't understand what had happened to it. Theo explained that the sword had broken during training. He was very sorry that his mother's birthday present had been destroyed. Cecilia was furious with whoever had made the sword. She had been promised that the sword could not be broken because it was made of white steel and black wood. Theo asked in surprise if the wood was from the jungles of Gaia. Yes, the wood was from there. Cecilia had been told that rare materials had been used to make the sword, but it seemed that this was a lie. Blackwood was an unusual plant that fed on metal. It was considered a rare material because it combined the flexibility of wood with the hardness of steel. Cecilia couldn't stop herself. She wanted an explanation and a new, even better sword for her son. But Theo assured her that there was no need. He would get another sword himself. But Cecilia refused. Finally, people saw Theo's value. Now, more than ever, they needed to take care of his appearance. Moreover, with less than a week left before the awakening ceremony, Theo needed a new sword. With so little time left, they had to leave immediately. But Theo didn't understand where they were going. Cecilia explained that they were going to the best smithy in Winter, Basque's workshop. The Basque workshop was one of 3 armories in Winter. The workshop's popularity was due to its production volume, which was similar to that of an entire factory, but that was not all. The main attraction of Basque was its owner. The intelligence service had given her a special rank. She became the holder of the title of Master Craftsman. She was known as the elven embodiment of capitalism, the demonic blacksmith, Curson. For Curson, the visit of Cecilia and Theo was a pleasant surprise. Theo never expected to meet a magician like Curson. How did Cecilia know about her? Curson looked at Cecilia and then said that the relationship between mother and child had ended when Cecilia decided to run away. Theo looked at Cecilia in confusion. Theo had always thought that his mother was an orphan. Could the high elf really be Cecilia's mother? That meant Theo was half-elf. Now it was clear why he was so handsome. Curson didn't understand what had brought Cecilia to her forge. Cecilia threw the sword at Curson and shouted that she wanted her defective goods back. Curson looked at Cecilia with anger. How could she say that the sword Curson had forged herself was defective? Pulling out the sword, Curson made sure that it was indeed broken. She wondered who the owner of the sword was. Cecilia quickly replied that the sword belonged to her son. Curson looked at Theo in surprise. Could this boy really be the owner of the sword? Cecilia asked Curson to watch her tongue and explained that Theo was a genius who would now lead the clan. The boy decided to introduce himself, Theo Ragnar from the Camellia Palace. He was overjoyed to meet the renowned blacksmith Basque. Curson noticed how well Cecilia had raised her son. She had heard about Theo. In a short time, everyone had probably heard about him. Curson decided to make sure that it was really Theo's sword. Theo confirmed that it was indeed his sword. Cecilia couldn't help herself and shouted again that the sword was of poor quality. At that moment, Theo seemed uncomfortable standing next to his mother. Theo's curiosity grew. It was difficult for him to recover from the news that the demon blacksmith was their relative. But Cecilia did not want to answer directly. Theo heard everything perfectly well, so why bother explaining? But Theo did not give up on his question. Cecilia explained that Theo knew nothing only because she did not often talk about her past. Even though it had only been 6 months, Curson had cared for Cecilia like his own child. Theo was saddened that he wasn't an elf after all. Cecilia continued her story. Curson loved everything she considered beautiful. It didn't matter if it was a precious stone, the theater, or even people. She must have really liked Cecilia, which is why she decided to take her in. But what was done, and now it didn't matter. But Theo was curious to know why his mother had run away from the smithy. But instead of Cecilia, Curson answered. Cecilia left on her own 2 feet, saying that she would become the wife of the clan chief. Curson thought Cecilia was a stupid girl. She had voluntarily gone to that miserable place. But it was commendable that she had managed to live there for so long. Cecilia explained that the clan chief was very kind and truly loved her. So Curson decided to tell Theo the rest of the story. Last year, Cecilia had suddenly returned and begged him to forge a sword for her son. Curson had never seen such shamelessness before. Cecilia couldn't understand how Curson could say such things about her in front of her son. Theo watched his mother and realized that he had never seen her like this before. Theo only now realized that he knew nothing about his mother in the past. Because he wanted so badly to be accepted by the clan, Theo had been an ungrateful son. The boy felt ashamed and sad. Theo also didn't understand why Curson didn't help them when times were tough if she cared so much about Cecilia. Theo didn't even notice when they reached Curson's room, which was her main office. Cecilia couldn't understand why Curson had brought them there. Curson let only Theo into the room. Cecilia didn't like this very much. She couldn't understand why Curson hadn't let her in. Curson immediately decided to ask Theo if he had the relic of the first dragon, but Theo just looked at Curson in surprise. He decided to ask Curson if he had understood her correctly. Curson was asking about the dragon ancestor who protected the clan. Theo had heard the legend of how their ancestor had distributed the treasures of the firstborn dragon to all the heirs of the Ragnar clan. But Theo's words only angered Curson. If Theo didn't have the relic, how could her sword have broken? Curson explained that she had put her heart and soul into this sword. and that nothing could destroy it except the relic. Theo explained that the sword had broken during his duel with Drake. He didn't understand what the relic had to do with it. Curson realized that it would be better to show him than to explain. Curson asked Theo what he had seen. Theo noticed the blue light again, the same one he had seen in the Camellia Palace. This meant that a new quest awaited Theo. From Theo's reaction, she realized that the boy had seen something, because she herself had not seen anything. She tried many times to open it to get the item inside, but all her attempts were in vain. Curson explained about the relic of the first dragon. Long ago, in the Age of Myths, the first dragon tore out one of his claws and forged a sword from it. It was a terrifying sword, the Blade of Moonlight. Curson explained to Theo that if he could get the sword, she would give it to him. But in the process, Theo could die. Was Theo willing to risk his own life? Theo already felt that the sword was his. Obtaining the sword, the Blade of Moonlight, was the second quest in the story. The Moonlight Blade was the sword of the leader of the Black Snow, one of the 9 dragons. But few knew what the sword looked like because everyone who had seen it, or even spoken of it, had died or disappeared without a trace. But by chance, Theo was lucky enough to see the shape of the Moonlight Blade. Why the Black Dragon did not destroy it remained a mystery. Theo was surprised that the Moonlight Blade was lying in this room and was also a relic of the first dragon. Theo was supposed to meet the Black Dragon in 4 years. This meant that the sword had been with Curson all this time. The same light was in the Camellia Palace, which meant that Theo had the key. Curson was very surprised when she saw the key. Theo inserted the key into the lock, and as soon as he turned it, he was able to open the box. A bright light emanated from it. Everything happened suddenly. Theo did not immediately realize that he had found himself in the Palace of Roses on that terrible day, when not only the palace, but also everyone in it was destroyed. But why was Theo there again? He saw his mother who had died. Theo remembered that he was too weak to destroy Randon in the Camellia Palace. Behind Theo stood a large bird that was screaming constantly. Theo grabbed it by the beak. Did the bird want to capture Theo's mind and turn his thirst for power against him? It was not for nothing that the sword was called Terrible. The bird did not understand who this boy was and how he was able to withstand its power. Theo explained that he had long since overcome the fear that the bird had shown him. Did the bird really think it could bribe Theo when the young man had a quest to complete? But the bird couldn't understand what the young man was talking about. He was a little different from the griffin Theo remembered. The bird used to be 10 meters taller, but now he was the same height as Theo. Perhaps this was because they had not been able to remove the seal, but it was just as well for Theo. Now the Moonlight Blade was his, but the bird asked him to just talk like 2 adults. Theo lost consciousness. His mother sat over him and begged him to wake up. Cecilia began to shout loudly at Curson and demand to know what she had done to Theo. All Cecilia asked was to get the sword for her son, not do who knows what to him. Curson looked at Theo and saw something she had never seen before. The monster's energy flowed through Theo's veins. Curson thought that everything would be fine because Theo had the relic. Cecilia looked at Curson with anger. She said she would never forgive Curson if anything happened to her son. A whirlwind of energy rose from Theo's heart in the room. Curson and Cecilia did not understand what was happening or what to expect next. After Theo came to his senses, Cecilia immediately threw her arms around him. He understood that his mother was worried about him, so he assured her that he was fine. Theo was able to defeat the griffin. He successfully completed the second story quest. As a reward, Theo received a Moonlight Sword. After his victory, Theo was able to increase his magical power. Theo's magical power became divine. The young man's magical power could be restored in 1.5 seconds. Now it was like that of a high-ranking swordsman. Theo wanted to use his magical power right away, but he had to wait for the awakening ceremony. Theo smiled at the surprised Curson. He really hoped that she would keep her promise. Raising his sword to the sky, Theo began to think that after so many years of imprisonment, the Moonlight Sword wanted to prove itself. Once free, it definitely wanted to release all the frustration that had built up inside it. Curson suggested that Theo strike the wall with his sword. She assured the young man that even the Moonlight Blade could not destroy this wall. Curson was sure that the blow of a boy who had not undergone the awakening ceremony would not be able to destroy the workshop. Theo could hide the heart of a dragon, so why not test the Moonlight Blade? So Theo didn't have to think long. He swung with all his might and struck only once. Theo used a single flash strike that split the workshop wall in 2. Curson was in despair. Her workshop was destroyed. No workshop meant no money. Theo realized that it was dangerous to just swing this sword around. The sword had absorbed all of Theo's magical power. Theo didn't even notice when Curson began to see through him. Curson was sure that Theo was out of magic. It was strange to Curson that Theo was able to destroy the wall of her workshop with just 1 strike of the Moonlight Sword. After what she saw, Curson also began to consider Theo a genius, especially since he was her grandson. Looking at Theo, Curson saw only money. She decided to become the young man's patron. All Theo had to do was spread his wings and show his talent to the world. Curson wanted Theo to become a walking advertisement for Basque's workshop. Theo was shocked by what Curson said. Cecilia noticed that her mother's eyes had turned into coins. It was time to leave the workshop and return to the palace. Theo decided to give the trophies from Drake to Curson as compensation for the destroyed wall. Curson believed that the boy had obtained them while acquiring the relic. Curson believed that Cecilia had indeed raised a wonderful son. Curson was distracted from her thoughts by a raven. She couldn't understand what it was doing near her workshop. 5 days passed quickly. Finally, the day of the awakening ceremony arrived. Theo trained hard with Evelyn every day. Evelyn noticed that Theo had become faster and more skilled at fencing. It was a real pleasure for Theo to hear Evelyn's praise. Young Theo had only begun to change 6 months ago and was already able to fight back against Evelyn. What would happen when he awakened his power? Evelyn believed that when Theo's magical power awakened, a monster would appear before their eyes. Theo had every chance of winning today's ceremony. Theo was grateful to Evelyn for everything she had done for him. Therefore, Theo decided to mention Evelyn when receiving his award if he really managed to win. The boys who were Theo's fans also wanted him to mention them, only Evelyn did not understand why he would do that. Theo Ragnar arrived at the main residence. The ceremony would take place there. For the Ragnars, the awakening ceremony was the most important event of the year. Everyone wanted to achieve the best result because it was here that the clan's swordsmen could gain their first glory and honor. The clan leader, Kyle Ragnar, would have his eyes fixed only on the swordsmen participating in the awakening ceremony. 9 dragons and even the former clan leader, Hilda Ragnar, would be watching them. Theo found it hard to believe that Hilda was already 150 years old. The judge of the Dragon Gate, Vana Ragnar, announced the start of the first trial. The goal of this trial was to pull out one of the swords and leave a mark on the wall in front of them. The wall was made of white steel, but the swords were forged from ordinary steel, so they could not leave a mark on the wall. Unless, of course, they used magical power in their attack, each participant was given a soma. One such pill gave 10 years worth of magical power. It was also supposed to help the participants open their chakra, so everyone had to drink the soma before the trial began in order to awaken their manic chamber and be able to leave a mark on the white steel wall with an ordinary sword. The result depended on the depth of the cut. The judge called out the names of the participants, and only then were they allowed to begin the trial. Theo Ragnar was first. In a previous life, Axion had been the best, but Theo knew that this time he would be the best. Theo took the sword and approached the wall. Kyle told Hilda about Theo. The boy had caught his father's attention, and it seemed that Hilda liked him too. Theo's third quest was to win the awakening ceremony and become the best. Hilda really wanted to see how worthy Kyle's son had become. Theo was a little nervous. Perhaps his memories of the past were causing him to feel anxious. The judge asked Theo to begin because there were other participants besides him. In his past life, Theo couldn't control his mana, but now everything was different. This time he would be able to do it. Theo summoned a large wave. The judge was very angry. He thought Theo was a fool because the boy couldn't control it. The pill had to be taken carefully so that the mana could take hold. Talented Ragnars had a lot of mana. If they didn't use it carefully, they risked losing it. The judge was surprised when he saw that Theo had managed to hold out. Theo was infinitely happy that he finally had the heart of a dragon, along with the devil's horn. Theo was worried that nothing would work out. That's how it was in his past life. But in any case, Theo could finally use mana officially. Now all he had to do was gather all the mana and release it. Theo had to pass this test. Everyone watched Theo's actions very closely. After the boy finally swung his sword, he was able to leave a large mark on the white metal wall. Everyone was not just surprised, they were shocked. Theo Ragnar had passed the test. Some of those present began to doubt that Theo had released his mana for the first time. After the test, Theo immediately noticed a message on the blue screen. His curse of failure was over. Theo's fame slowly spread throughout the world. People began to show interest in Theo's performance. Osa Ragnar wanted to take Theo as her apprentice. Julius Ragnar was unhappy that Theo was attracting so much attention. Robert Ragnar began to fear Theo. Hilda Ragnar began to show even more interest in the boy. Theo did not expect any attention from the black and graceful dragons. And the fact that Hilda had her eye on Theo made the young man wary. Hilda had the heart of a Garuda. Theo wanted to win that heart. The next to pass the test was Sybil Drea. Sybil was very happy to have done so. The 4 hounds of the north also took part in the awakening ceremony. Of course, the northern hounds were strong and left deep marks on the wall, but no one else could leave a mark like Theo's. Now there was only one participant left in this test. It was Axion. The audience began to whisper that this was a real duel between a brilliant tiger and a dark leopard. After Axion took the pill, he swung and also struck the wall. This year, the participants did not cease to amaze the judge. Action Ragnar delivered exactly the same blow as Theo Ragnar. Only the depth of the mark would determine the winner. At this stage, the first test was complete. Those participants who passed had to go and prepare for the second test, which would take place in 4 days. In the meantime, it was time to do what everyone had been waiting for. Theo Ragnar was the winner of the first test. Not only those present were shocked, but Theo himself. After Axion delivered his blow, Theo began to doubt his victory. His technique, magic, and speed were all top-notch. Theo received 10 out of 10 points. It was hard for those present to believe that the brilliant tiger was the winner. People were shocked that Axion had lost. The depth of the mark left by Theo's sword was similar to that left by the young Lord Torquella in his time. Almost like Torquella. Torquell Ragnar was one of the 5 best candidates for the role of the next heir. Axion Ragnar was in second place, although he scored 10 out of 10. The length of the mark was shorter than that of Theo Ragnar. That is why Axion was second. The judge began to announce the entire list of participants. In third place was Remington Narzio. Fourth place went to Ray Ragnar. In fifth place was Halkus. Sybil Drea took 87th place. Everyone did a great job with the task, and now it was time to prepare for the second test. The second stage of the awakening ceremony was to take place 4 days later in the Winter Mountains. Those who made it through the first stage would have to prepare well for the second. In the evening, everyone gathered to celebrate the successful completion of the trial. Theo was grateful for the support, but this was not the end. They also had to pass the second trial together. Theo was confident that he and Remington would take first and second place in the final. Evelyn had no doubts about the young man. Remington congratulated Theo. He was glad to see that all the hard work and training had finally paid off for Theo. But Remington was ashamed that he had fallen so far behind. Theo reassured him, saying that this time Theo had just been lucky. Besides, was it really that important among friends? Theo's words reassured Remington. Besides, they had to prove themselves in the second test. In his past life, Theo could not even dream of being the best at the awakening ceremony. And now it was true. It was hard for Theo to believe that he had defeated Axion, even if it wasn't a real battle. But it wasn't enough to get rid of Randon. He was just a lackey. Theo's real enemies were Axion and the Heavenly Dragon. Theo wanted to use any means necessary to get revenge on them. Theo still didn't know what the compass was for. When he got it, he noticed that it pointed to the Winter Mountains. During the second stage, Theo had the opportunity to find out which nest the compass was pointing to. Someone was following Theo. To find out who it was, Theo sneaked up behind the person and pointed his sword at them. The boy decided to quickly explain everything. His name was Gatsby Yotan from the Storm Sword Platoon. The boy's captain decided to recruit Theo after seeing the young man's strength at the awakening ceremony. The captain offered Theo an introductory qualification test. Theo didn't expect to be invited so soon. Theo couldn't even imagine that he would have to take a test. Gatsby hoped that Theo knew his commander. Gatsby thought it was a great chance to join them. The boys' conversation was interrupted by the vice commander of the Blackstaff Cavalry, the fiery goblin Ayan Sasoli. The Blackstaff Cavalry wanted Theo Ragnar to join them without any test. Suddenly, representatives of various platoons began to approach Theo. They all wanted Theo to join them, but the only thing Theo wanted was to get out of there as quickly as possible. The Lady of the Palace of Flowering Plums, the gracious dragon Osa Ragnar, was the first wife of the clan chief. She also wanted to get her hands on a talent like Theo Ragnar. Action hated Theo. He began to take out his anger on the training ground. Axion destroyed everyone who was near him. Ed decided to talk to the boy, but Axion just threw his sword at him. Ed didn't like that Axion was taking out his anger on others. Ed wanted Axion to go with him and listen to the plan for the second stage of the awakening ceremony. It was a plan to destroy Theo Ragnar. Theo was just as shocked as everyone else. Lady Blossom came to Theo herself. Now there was no chance that the young man would agree to join them. Everyone present found it hard to believe that Os Ragnar had created the isolation. Now, no one could hear what the Lady of the Flowering Plum Palace was saying to Theo Ragnar. Perhaps she wanted to share the secrets of her techniques with Theo. Seeing Osa Ragnar's ability to isolate space from the outside world was fantastic. Only now did Theo begin to understand how special he had become. The demonic dragon would have been furious at what Osa wanted to do, but she didn't care. She wanted to give Theo a gift. It was hard for the boy to believe that everything that was happening to him was real. Osa Ragnar explained that the clan leader's fencing skills were unmatched. They were like dragon flames falling from the sky, incinerating everything in their path. But the Lady of the Palace, the blossoming plum tree, was different. She possessed endless variations of swords. The dragon that Osa Ragnar aspired to be had countless forms. Osa Ragnar called it the Rain of Heavenly Flowers, the first technique of the blossoming plum tree. Theo watched her spellbound. In one continuous motion, Osa combined 120 variations. It turned out that in terms of pure fencing, Osa Ragnar surpassed even the clan leader. Theo wanted to try to apply this technique in his flash. The Lady of the Palace, Blooming Plum, was glad that Theo was able to enjoy the spectacle, but Theo doubted whether he was really worthy of such a gift. Osa Ragnar invited Theo to come anytime after the ceremony if he wanted to see more. The people around them looked at them with surprise and envy. The Lady of the Blooming Plum wanted Theo to become the new wind of this place. Theo was shocked, but at the same time delighted. Such a gift exceeded even the young man's wildest expectations. It would be rude of Theo not to express his gratitude for such a gift. It would certainly not be easy to become a student of the Lady of the Blooming Force and join the dragon riders in white armor. 3 days passed. It was time for the second stage of the awakening ceremony. The Winter Mountains were not far from the Great Northern Wall. The Winter Mountains stretched for a great distance from Ventera to the demonic sea itself. The Rangars had been in this place for over 1,000 years. They protected humanity from the cursed lands beyond the wall and defended against the demonic sea teeming with monsters. Jackie Ragnar was a second stage observer and a high-ranking swordsman. He explained that one day, every young man would have to inherit this duty. That was why the second stage took place in the Winter Mountains. Jackie also explained that fencing students were forbidden to enter the demonic sea, so the accessible area was limited to the inner part of the wall. Everyone had to be very careful. According to Jackie, the second task was not difficult. All the participants had to do was defeat the monsters roaming the Winter Mountains and obtain the bells hanging around their necks. The bells were painted in 7 colors: red, orange, green, blue, and purple. The colors were arranged in order of the points earned. The more points, the stronger the monster, especially the demons with purple bells. The students were unable to defeat them, but they brought in a lot of points. The method of hunting monsters depended solely on the young men. The only requirement was to return with a bell before the end of the exam. Theo realized that any method was acceptable, including destroying an opponent's monster or stealing its bell. It seemed that the young men were deliberately being pitted against each other, but such was the law of the Ragnars. Jackie continued to explain that totems had been set up throughout the mountains to scare away monsters. Supplies were hidden in designated safe areas that the young men could use as they wished. The task would last 15 days. Therefore, Sybil decided to get the supplies first and then go to Theo's aid. Action had to follow Ed's plan in order to destroy Theo in the Winter Mountain. Theo also decided to start the mission, but Remington stopped Theo with a question about friends. Remington spent 3 days thinking, and came to the conclusion that Theo was both a friend and a rival to him. Therefore, Remington's desire was unchanging. He wanted to surpass Theo. This feeling was familiar to Theo because he also saw Remington as both a friend and a rival. Remington felt calmer after hearing this. He was going to be the best in the second stage. Remington just wanted Theo to know that. Theo was very excited that Remington had made him his goal. But Theo had to put all his thoughts aside for later because it was time to go in search of the dragon's nest. Theo was on the outskirts of the Winter Mountains. Holding a compass in his hands, he followed the trail it indicated. But the young man could not understand where exactly the nest was. Could the dragon's nest really be underground? Theo really hoped he wouldn't have to dig because he had nothing but his sword. However, Theo had no other options. As soon as the young man drew his sword, he immediately asked his pursuers to stop hiding and come out to him. Three fools from Mount Vuk, Hyde Sao Lun, were chasing Theo. The boys thought that their end had come because Theo was incredibly strong. These three fools were a perfect example of what can happen when the Rangars are constantly chasing power. These three always followed their thirst for blood for the sake of entertainment. The massacre they carried out in the village of Vuk that day. It was Theo who had to deal with the aftermath while working on Black Snow. So Theo understood the nature of these idiots better than anyone else. More than 700 people died that day, and 220 people were missing. The most horrific thing was that none of the victims could be identified because the scoundrels had completely destroyed each of their heads. Theo planned to get rid of them, but he had no idea it would happen so quickly. Could Axion have sent them? But the young man just laughed and said that Axion wasn't important enough to give orders. Someone stronger had sent them. But Theo didn't understand who that could be. So Theo decided it must be the head of the council. The boys stood rooted to the spot. They knew Theo would figure it out. They had also tricked the watchman. Now Theo understood why he hadn't seen him. Theo uncovered their plan, but the scoundrels didn't care. They believed that Theo Ragnar would die anyway. Young Theo had no choice but to accept the villain's challenge. Theo used the triple dragon technique. The villains were very surprised when they saw this technique. One blow was enough for Theo to defeat all three villains at once. The boy did not want to stoop to the level of these young men, so their heads remained intact. Theo had learned the technique he showed Lady Osha Ragnar in 3 days. Now, with one strike, Theo could combine 3 different strikes. When Theo struck hard, the sword became lighter and easier to control. This opened up many different possibilities. It was time for Theo to think about more important things. But suddenly Theo heard a strange noise. Approaching the edge of the mountain, Theo noticed a staircase below. A new quest opened up for Theo. He had to find the invisible staircase and explore the blue cave. Action was in first place. He had 21 bells and had gathered a group of 21 people. Ray Ragnar was in second place. But no one was interested in the results of the others. They were only interested in Theo Ragnar's result. But Theo didn't have a single bell or a single person on his team. Julius believed that Theo had simply set up an ambush. But Wolfgang assured him that just because he had passed the first stage did not mean that he would pass the second stage. It took more than just swinging a sword. Wolfgang believed that half-breeds were not up to such a test. He was pleased that he had hired those 3 scoundrels. Ed was shocked by what Wolfgang had done. Wolfgang was confident that his plan had worked. Ed was angry that old Wolfgang was doing whatever came into his head. After Theo's trial, Ed had time to explore the Rose Palace. But Ed couldn't find the dragon relic. Theo couldn't be destroyed until he revealed the location of the relic. The observant wasp Ragnar noticed that the head of the council and the heavenly dragon were up to something. So it was better to be safe than sorry. But Julius knew that Theo was not one to give up easily. He was sure that the young man had a plan. Theo would succeed in any case, so there was no point in interfering with the awakening ceremony. Julius was angry with Osa for not telling him about her meeting with the boy. Osa just smiled sweetly at Julius and said that Theo was not opposed to meeting him. When Theo went downstairs, he noticed that there was a magical trap inside the cave. When an ordinary person fell into it, they could easily go mad. But after Theo opened the Gate of Mana, the trap had no effect on him. The compass led him to this very place. Finally, the dragon's nest. It was here that 3 years later, the captain of the Black Snow would destroy the dragon and obtain a legendary item. But this time, Theo got there first. Eamon Moy's grimoire. When Theo opened the door, what he saw shocked him. This was not a baby's nest. On the contrary, a real ancient dragon lived here. For Theo, this was a problem because a duel with a dragon meant certain death. Theo didn't understand where this giant dragon had come from. Could the Black Snow have hidden what had happened in this place? Or maybe Theo had just come here 3 years earlier. Whatever the case, it was better to leave. Theo was no match for this dragon. Of course, Theo was sad, but it would be better to return here later before the Black Snow found this place. The ancient dragon, Lodbrok. Much time had passed since the Chosen One had come to this place. She was the mistress of the Winter Mountains, and one of those whom Ragnar called the Guardian Dragon. Theo was surprised and frightened at the same time. It was hard for the boy to believe that Lodbrok was standing before him. Theo bowed to the dragon. It was a great honor for him to meet his ancestor. Lodbrok was very surprised that Theo called her his ancestor, so Theo asked her if she was the companion of their most ancient ancestor, and also the mother of the second head of the clan, Friedrich. But Lodbrok just looked at Theo indignantly and then said that Friedrich was a lousy peasant who had spread this nonsense. Although they called each other companions, it was only a sign of respect between partners who were bound by a soul contract, but there were no romantic feelings between them. And anyway, how could Theo imagine a relationship between a human and a dragon? Theo realized that all the stories about dragon blood in their family tree were lies. But Lodbrok explained that this was not entirely true. Through the soul contract, she shared her blood with Sigurd. But enough talk. Lodbrok must fulfill her duty as the dragon guardian of the Ragnar clan. According to the law of the firstborn, Lodbrok gave the chosen one who passed the test the opportunity to ask 3 questions. This turn of events delighted Theo. Instead of a duel, he could simply ask 3 questions. Theo's goal was unchanged. He wanted to rise to the top of the Ragnar clan, so it was worth finding out as much information as possible. While Theo was talking to the dragon, Axion continued to complete the second stage of his task. He managed to get 52 bells. Action was curious to know if Theo had sent any information, but there was no news. Everyone thought that Theo was just hiding. Action's servant, Orion Gardner, believed that Theo was simply afraid of having to fight for real. Only Action could easily defeat a high-ranking demon, so it was best for the young man to remain on his side. Orion believed that Theo had become stronger, but he was still a loser. Action was angry with Orion. A weakling like him could not understand that as long as there was fear, there was strength. That was why Action was afraid of no one. The messenger interrupted the young man's conversation. He had a message from the head of the intelligence department. Axion had to proceed with the plan immediately. But Axion asked him to tell him not to rush. He knew very well how much Axion wanted to destroy Theo, so as soon as Theo appeared, he would get rid of him immediately. Finally, Theo was ready to ask his first question. Ladblock was delighted that the boy was finally ready. She had waited so long that she had even managed to get some sleep. Theo was curious to know if there was any reason why Ladblock was in this place. She liked the question. Ladblock noticed that the boy was quite intelligent in his questions. The reason for her presence in this place lay in a monster that lived beyond the demon sea at the very edge of the world. A lord without a name. For the last 1,000 years, Ladblock had been bound by a duty to protect the world from the monster. The Winter Mountains were just a stronghold. Theo couldn't even imagine it. Now he understood that what he had seen in Ladblock's eyes was fear. It was hard for Theo to realize that there was something in the world that instilled fear in an ancient dragon who had defended the land for 1,000 years. Theo wanted to know more, but there were more important questions. In his second question, Theo asked about the relic of the first dragon. Ladblock found it funny that someone who had 3 relics was asking about a relic. Theo was surprised by what he heard. The first relic was from the dungeon of the Kamalia Palace. The second relic was the Moonlight Blade. But Theo did not understand what the third relic was. The relic of the first dragon was created to defeat the nameless monster. The first dragon, Fafnir, created them. He divided his soul into 31 fragments to protect humans. The relics took different forms. They could be different objects, different forms of experience, or even strange phenomena. Finally, Theo realized that the third relic was the phenomenon that had taken him back 10 years. In other words, Theo himself was the firstborn dragon Fafnir. Now everything fell into place. But there was something strange. Each relic was defended by a dragon. And what was happening to Theo? The boy was ready to ask the last question. Theo was curious why Ladblock had called him the Chosen One. But Ladblock asked a counter question. Did Theo really think he was the only one chosen? Surprised, Theo tried to digest what he had heard. Were there others whom the relic had chosen? Ed Curson, the Black Dragon, knew about the relics and wanted to collect them all. If they were like Theo, they must have also seen the messages that Theo saw. Or they could even be regressors. Theo was one step closer to the truth about the structure of the world. But everything became even more confusing. The Nameless Lord was a creature that even ancient dragons feared. The possibility of other regressors existing. Theo asked all 3 questions, which meant he could claim his reward. Theo successfully completed the quest and was rewarded with the treasures of the firstborn dragon. This nest contained many treasures from all over the world. Stones, grimoires, elixirs, secret writings, and weapons. It didn't matter what Theo chose, it would be impossible to find another item like it. Ladblock was ready to give away anything in the nest. Theo wanted to get Ladblock, but Ladblock just laughed at Theo's desire. It seemed that her fame was eternal. Ladblock thought that Theo was just joking, so she wanted to hear his secret wish. But Theo was not joking. Ladblock became angry. She considered Theo arrogant and used her ability to intimidate the Dragon Guard. Ladblock was very angry. Did Theo really want to take all her treasures and wisdom just by talking? Theo couldn't just give up, so he used his ability to intimidate Little Drake. But Ladblock considered Theo's attempts futile because it was impossible to defeat her with Little Drake's strength. Not knowing what to do next, Theo simply shouted that the Guardian Dragon had promised that Theo could take anything from the dragon's nest. And there was no mention of not being able to take Ladblock. Ladblock was a dragon guardian who founded the Ragnar clan together with the most ancient ancestor of the Sigurd family. There was no better recognition of strength than becoming close to Ladblock. They couldn't miss this opportunity to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Theo shouted again that he was choosing Ladblock because she had given her word. Ladblock looked at Theo, but for some reason she saw Sigurd. After that, she agreed to let Theo take her away. There was no trace of the giant dragon. In its place stood a girl. She smiled sweetly at Theo. She decided to give him a chance because Theo had caught her interest. Theo stood silently, mesmerized, looking at Ladblock. It seemed that her beauty had caught the young man's attention, but she was over 2,000 years old. Theo's attention was drawn to Ladblock's heart. She explained to the boy that 50 years ago she had lost her heart. Since then, all she could do was wait for her death. She had about 3 years left to live. Because of this, Ladblock could not leave her nest, so she could not directly help Theo. So did Theo really want to choose her? Theo's answer did not change. He needed Ladblock. Theo hoped that thanks to her, he would become stronger and be able to obtain more relics. A soul contract was established between Theo and Ladblock. Theo wanted to find something among the relics that could serve Ladblock instead of her heart, because Theo wanted to live up to the title of Guardian Dragon Companion. Ladblock decided to remind Theo that she would not be able to leave the nest until he found a replacement for her heart. Until he did, she would remain in a deep sleep. Ladblock also had a task for Theo. To establish a true connection between their souls, Theo had to read a book and awaken the Gate of Rosum. She believed that Theo would need less than a month to read it, so he had to stay in the nest, where there was also food. This was another reward for Theo, Amon's grimoire. Theo looked at the grimoire and couldn't believe it really belonged to him. Of course, it was great that Theo got the grimoire, but he didn't understand what month Ladblock was talking about. She explained that it took about that long to study the gates of the mind. Surely Theo had more important things to do. Theo explained to Ladblock that he was currently undergoing the second stage of the awakening ceremony. It would only take 15 days. Perhaps Theo could return later. Of course, it was possible, but Ladblock would not allow him to do so. If Theo left, Ladblock would lose all interest in him. She needed Theo to open the gates of the mind before the second stage was complete. Until Theo did so, he was forbidden to leave the nest. Theo clearly did not expect such a turn of events. There were 13 days left until the end of the second stage. Theo would have to try very hard to win this stage. 3 days before the start of the second stage of the awakening ceremony, the reconnaissance headquarters, Ed explained to Axion about the totems that scared away demons. All this was happening because of the pearls inside. The monsters imprisoned inside the pearls gave off a powerful energy and prevented other monsters from approaching. But if you broke the pearl, you could summon the monsters yourself. The main goal of this stage was to earn as many points as possible. If Theo wanted to win, he would have to hunt. Action understood that Ed wanted to use the pearl as a trap for Theo. That was Ed's plan. But they couldn't touch Theo until they found out about the relic of the Rose Palace. Axion just wanted to get information out of Theo, but Ed explained that the young man was in no way inferior to Axion. Therefore, it was better to use Theo's attachment to other people against him. Ed believed that Theo's friends could be used. For their sake, he had to tell them everything. 15 days passed. No one had seen Theo during that time. There were 12 hours left until the end of the trial. Axion Ragnar was in first place with 860 points. The candidate from the palace, Felix Ragnar, was in 7th place with 446 points. The young man believed that 3 scoundrels had destroyed Theo. Otherwise, it was simply impossible to understand where the boy had gone. Axion considered Felix a loser whom no one counted on. Axion didn't like it at all that no one knew where Theo had gone. Therefore, if Theo Ragnar had decided to play hide and seek, Axion had to lure him out of his hiding place. The scoundrel Axion decided to destroy Theo's friends until the boy came out of hiding. Ray Ragnar, who was in 3rd place in the 2nd stage with 561 points, heard about Axion's evil intention. Theo's friends had no idea what awaited them. They just continued to search for bells. There were 12 hours left until the end of the 2nd stage. Like everyone else, Sybil didn't understand where Theo had gone. He was worried about him, but the boys were sure that Theo was doing something better than hunting monsters. The boys' conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Oriana Hanavi, who took 14th place in the 2nd stage with 173 points. She simply destroyed Sybil. The boys couldn't understand why she did it. Orion explained that she just wanted to meet Theo Ragnar, and if no one could find him, maybe his friends' cries would bring him out. While Theo's friends were being destroyed, the boy finally finished studying the Gate of the Mind. Lodblack was pleased that Theo had done it so quickly. For Theo, it was no surprise. Thanks to the Manic Chamber in the Dragon's Heart, he could study the grimoire faster than others. From now on, Theo had access to the C-rank Dragon Symphony. Theo could see the essence of things and read residual memories. Now Theo was worthy of being called Lodblack's companion, but that wasn't all. Theo still had a long way to go. Once Theo advanced further, he would be able to contact Lodblack at any time, and even use her power after healing Lodblack's heart. But Theo had to hurry because Lodblack only had 3 years left to live. Theo promised to heal her heart. From that moment on, the soul contract came into effect. Lodblack would eagerly await her next meeting with Theo. Now that Theo had made a deal with Lodblack, it was time to move on to the test. There wasn't much time left. Theo knew that hunting took a lot of time, so at this rate, he wouldn't be able to get first place. Theo would have to take a different path. In his past life, Axion had taken first place. It would probably be the same this time. So in order to win, Theo would have to defeat Axion. Finally, Theo Ragnar was found. Theo looked surprised and did not understand what had happened or why they were looking for him. Ray was the first to find Theo. She was in terrible condition. Theo wanted to know what had happened to her, but the girl was exhausted and wounded. Ray had difficulty speaking. Theo couldn't understand who had hurt Ray. Could it have been a monster? But Ray explained that the wound had been made with a sword, and that it had been inflicted by a human. The boy wanted to know everything that had happened to her, but Ray wanted to talk about it later. All Ray managed to say before she collapsed exhausted onto Theo was for him to go west. As soon as Theo touched Ray's sword, he was able to see the memories stored in it thanks to his Dragon Symphony ability. Theo saw all the villains who were in Axion's team and heard that they had been looking for him all this time. Theo also noticed that the villains had tied up his friends just to lure Theo to them. Thanks to his Dragon Symphony ability, Theo knew that the villains had set a trap for him with monsters. The villains captured 9 young men, but Axion only needed 2, so Axion thought that the rest could simply be destroyed. As soon as one of Axion's henchmen swung to destroy one of the 9 boys, Ray immediately decided to stop them. Ray believed that the boys had crossed the line. Axion wanted to chase Ray away. She had no business being there, but Ray begged him to let the young men go because they were Theo's friends. Axion realized that Ray was also on Theo Ragnar's side. Ray lunged at Axion, but Axion was stronger and easily wounded Ray. At that moment, all of Ray's memories of the sword were interrupted. Due to his low skill level, Theo had limitations on his memories. Theo was overcome with rage. He wanted to know from Ray why Axion had captured his friends. Ray looked at Theo in surprise and couldn't understand how he knew about Axion's actions. He asked Ray to tell him everything. Ray said that Axion was obsessed with capturing Theo. But since Theo was nowhere to be found, Axion decided to take his friends captive. Ed and Axion did not want to leave the young man alone, either in his past life or in this one. Theo asked Ray to tell him where Axion was. One of Axion's henchmen reported that Theo had finally been found. He had been seen on the northern slope. He also reported that Ray Ragnar was with Theo. The news of Theo's appearance greatly pleased Axion. Finally, he would have the opportunity to prove that a half-breed could not be better than him. But Axion was reminded that he had to find out the location of the relic with the help of the hostages. Therefore, he could not kill Theo. Ray did not want to reveal Axion's whereabouts. Theo could not meet with him. Ray explained that people from the intelligence service were involved. This was no longer a competition, but a real battle. The scoundrels had set a trap for Theo, so the young man couldn't go alone. He had to find someone to join him. But Theo didn't have time to gather people. No one knew what the scoundrels had done to the boys, so they had to leave immediately. Ray tried to explain to Theo that if he went, he would simply die. Ray didn't understand why Theo was risking his life. She explained to Theo that they had to act cautiously, even at the cost of other people's lives. Theo was furious. He didn't want to lose his people again. Theo remembered his friends. They had planned to celebrate their victory together after passing the second stage. Ray asked Theo to come to his senses and remember that he was part of Ragnar's clan, so there would be casualties. It seemed that everyone in the mountains could hear their argument. Theo said that Ray had gotten herself into this mess because she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. The young man was simply tired of being on the side of the weak, or like a worthless fool. Theo didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, so he asked Ray to tell him where Axion was. Remington noticed the supplies Sybil had gathered. The bells were scattered around and there was blood near them. Remington realized that something was clearly wrong. Next to Remington was Halkus Lank, who was in 5th place in the second stage. He had 499 points. Also with them was Erica Lank, who was in 4th place in the second stage. She had 521 points. Remington Narzio was in 2nd place in the second stage. He had 688 points. Remington wanted Halkus and Erica to help him figure out what had happened to the young men. Just as Theo was about to leave for Axion, he was attacked by monsters. Theo didn't like this at all. He didn't plan on staying long in a fight with monsters. Theo was sure that Sybil and the rest of the young men were alive. Axion was just a puppet in Ed's hands. Everything had been staged just to get rid of Theo and arouse as little suspicion as possible. The monsters kept coming back. Theo decided to use a triple strike to destroy all the monsters in one blow. The fact that the Security Bureau observers were working with Axion spoke volumes. Theo was sure that the observers were supposed to restrain Axion. Theo had to hurry because Axion was very unpredictable. Ray was surprised at how strong Theo was. Had he always been like this? While Theo was destroying the monsters, Ray remembered how little Theo had brought her home on a cold winter morning when she was wearing only a shirt and shared his scarf with her. Once, Theo had helped Ray. This time, Ray wanted to help Theo. She didn't want to let the boy go alone because she knew exactly what awaited him. Sybil couldn't sit still, so he kept making noises. Axion didn't like the young man's behavior, so he decided to simply destroy him. But Axion was immediately stopped. He wasn't supposed to cause trouble. So, angry, Axion decided to hide his sword. 4 high-ranking swordsmen were sent after Theo because Ed decided that Axion was not strong enough to deal with the young man on his own. Finally, Theo Ragnar decided to show himself. Axion's mood improved slightly. The young man looked at Theo with hope for salvation. Theo looked at his friends with horror. He was hurt by what these scoundrels had done to them. Axion really didn't like that Theo had kept them waiting. He was sure that Theo knew what was going on, so there was no need to waste time. They should have gotten straight to the point. Axion began to talk about what Theo should do to save the boys. Theo immediately interrupted him, asking if Axion was scared. Axion didn't understand what Theo was talking about, but the young man continued to insist that Axion was afraid of defeat. Otherwise, why would he resort to such tricks? Theo continued to talk about how Axion had built a wall of bandits who were constantly watching from afar. He also mentioned Axion's pathetic attempt to kidnap the hostages. All this was done out of fear of losing. Theo believed that Axion did not deserve the title of Hound of the North. All of Theo's words greatly angered Axion. If Axion wanted to refute everything Theo said, he simply had to face Theo and cross swords with him in a duel. Of course, that is, if Axion had even a shred of dignity left. If Axion won, he would get everything, including Theo's life. But if he lost, he would release the hostages. Theo's words only made Axion laugh. The worthless Ragnar was challenging him to a duel. Axion believed that Theo's arrogance knew no bounds. Did Theo really think that Axion was afraid of him? Axion was too emotional, so Theo knew that he could easily play on his emotions. Axion was warned that Theo was provoking him and that he should not be taken in by Theo's words. Enraged, Axion realized that even the observers did not trust him, so he decided to accept Theo's challenge and fight him. One of the observers watched everything that was happening with fear. He believed that Axion had ruined the plan, but another observer assured him that everything was going according to plan. It had just become a little more complicated. Axion warned his henchmen that the hostages were part of the agreement between him and Theo, so they had no right to touch them until the end of the duel. The duel began. Both young men were strong, so Axion grew tired of simple sword swings. He decided to show Theo one trick, the true power of the Ragnars, the heavenly roar of a dragon. This move took Theo by surprise, but there was no time to hesitate, so Theo used the triple dragon strike. Axion froze in surprise. He thought that after his move, Theo would be finished, but he couldn't even leave a scratch on the boy. Theo couldn't understand if Axion really thought he was good enough to teach young Theo Ragnar. Orion Hanavi was also a member of the scaled dragon community. In the second stage, he was in 14th place with 179 points. The young man looked at Theo with horror. He believed that Theo's victory in the first stage was accidental. Everyone who saw Theo's strength was always amazed at how strong the boy was. Therefore, Orion understood that at this rate, Axion would lose the duel. Orion began to think about switching sides to Theo. Axion had always been a fool. On the other hand, Orion knew that their people were everywhere, so Theo would not be able to survive. From childhood, Axion had been told that he was the one who had to take the throne of the Ragnars for the sake of his mother and uncle, and for the prosperity of their clan. Ed told the young man every day that he had to remember who Axion was, and young Axion was Troyvon. As a child, the young man just looked at his uncle in amazement. Axion was taught from an early age to be a scoundrel and to hate Theo. In the duel, Theo told Axion that everything was going according to plan. Roddy was also quick to report that Theo Ragnar had been found. The first to find him was Axion. Julius was delighted to hear the news. He knew that Theo Ragnar would not sit idly by, but would come out and do everything possible to win. Wolfgang, on the other hand, was enraged by this news. He couldn't understand why the 3 scoundrels hadn't destroyed Theo Ragnar. Ed breathed a sigh of relief when he heard that Theo was alive. Theo Ragnar had no right to be killed until he revealed the secret of the relic. Ed hoped that Axion would be able to extract the necessary information from Theo. News of the duel between Theo and Axion was not long in coming. This information only angered Ed. He did not understand why Axion had challenged Theo to a duel. The duel between Theo and Axion continued. Of course, Axion noticed that Theo had learned how to wield swords, but he believed that Theo lacked speed. Axion could easily guess Theo's next move. Theo froze when he saw that Axion was using the flying sword technique. Axion believed that Theo had been poorly trained if every strike was predictable. After the flying sword technique, Axion believed that Theo was finished. What Axion saw shocked him. Theo caught the sword that Axion threw at him with one hand. Only now did Theo realize that it was Axion who had thrown the sword at him in his past life. Theo was happy that he had finally found the scoundrel who had dared to destroy him in the past. Theo was destroyed on that difficult day, but he never understood who was behind it all because he was a worthless Ragnar. On that terrible day, the only lucky thing was that Rendon gave himself away, and Evelyn found out that he worked for the Camellia Palace. That's how Theo learned that he had been destroyed by one of the Troy vans. Only one person possessed the technique of the flying sword. That person was Axion Ragnar. To release a weapon from your hands, you had to be either insane or extremely confident. Theo destroyed Axion's sword. He had not been confident before, but after this battle, Theo understood why those pathetic scoundrels wanted to destroy him. Axion was shocked that Theo was able to destroy the sword with his bare hands. Theo assured Axion that he would not allow anyone to touch him or his friends. Axion began to mock the boy, but Axion stopped mocking him when he saw that Theo seemed possessed by the devil. Axion found it difficult to comprehend what was happening. Axion began to guess that Theo had been hiding his strength all along, but it was unclear why he had done so. Now it seemed that Axion was really afraid. Theo wanted Axion to finally show the strength he had been boasting about. Axion began to feel anger and despair. At that moment, he began to hate Theo even more. Theo's thirst for revenge gave him even more strength. He understood perfectly well that Axion had never even thought about what it felt like to have a sword between his ribs. Remington understood that the tracks were not from monsters. Someone had clearly attacked the young men. Only Axion was capable of such cruelty. But Halkus and Erica couldn't understand why Axion needed to do this. If he wanted more bells, why bother when he was already in first place? Remington guessed that this was how he wanted to lure Theo out. It looked as if Axion wanted to destroy Theo during the second stage. Halkus was angry that Axion was not playing fair. The trial was supposed to be honest and fair. Erica, on the other hand, didn't understand what was so strange about it. They were in the Ragnar clan, so it wasn't surprising that someone would destroy others during the ceremony. That was why Erica didn't like the Ragnars. Even if you believed in the right of the strongest, this was too much. Halkus was afraid that someone might hear them, so he asked Erica to think about what she was saying. Remington decided to protect his friends because that's what young Theo would have done. Of course, it would have been great if Halkus and Erica had helped Remington. Halkus agreed to help right away, but Erica didn't want to. Erica followed Halkus only to meet Theo Ragnar, but he was nowhere to be found. Besides, Erica despised weak men, so she had no desire to help them. Remington knew why Erica was looking for Theo, so he promised to introduce her to him if she helped them. It didn't take long to persuade Erica, so the young men just had to hold on a little longer. Help was on the way. But halfway there, they were stopped by a community of scaly dragons. The scoundrels began to mock Remington for trading them for a fool and getting involved with a bunch of pumped-up idiots. Halkus was angered by the villain's words. Remington asked them to step aside and not fight his old friend. Remington gave Orion a chance to get out of their way. But if Orion didn't want to do it voluntarily, Remington had only one option to force the boy to step aside and not interfere. The duel between Axion and Theo continued. Axion's broken sword fell next to Sybil. The young man decided to try to free himself. Sybil understood that he couldn't miss such an opportunity. Unexpectedly for everyone present, a third person intervened in the duel between Axion and Theo. This person turned out to be a high-level swordsman observer, Liam Troyven. He apologized to Axion for not being able to help him earlier. He was ready to accept punishment after the awakening ceremony. Action ordered Liam to protect him, so now Liam took part in the duel instead of Action. One of the observers gave Axion his sword and said that the young man had fought well, but the rest was up to the observers. Liam noticed that Theo was indeed very strong, not only against Axion, but even against the high-level swordsman Liam had brought with him. Although Liam was sure that Theo was too weak for him, he even felt sorry for destroying a genius like Theo. Of course, Liam understood that destroying Theo was necessary for the Troyvans. Therefore, without a single doubt, he swung his sword to deliver a devastating blow. But Liam was not destined to destroy Theo. It seemed that Axion wanted to do it himself so badly that he simply destroyed Liam. The other observers did not understand Axion's actions. The young man did not like that everyone thought he was losing the fight with Theo. He was enraged that they had decided to humiliate the heir to the throne. Action acknowledged that Theo was strong. Ed had always taught him that weaklings were useless. He constantly told Action that he was blessed by God. But in order for Axion to take the throne of the Ragnars, he had to step over dead bodies. Therefore, Axion was convinced that Theo Ragnar was still weaker than him. That is why Axion could not lose to someone like Theo, especially in this place. Axion assured Theo that he was the one who should take the throne. Action was also sure that anyone who dared to stand in his way would die. So the fight between Theo and Axion went on. The spectators decided to help Liam. They knew that Axion was crazy, but they didn't think he was that crazy. Liam ordered them to help Axion in the fight. But Axion was against anyone interfering. Liam insisted that Theo had to die. If Axion died, they would all be destroyed. Axion became even more enraged. All he wanted was to destroy Theo. Axion Ragnar had been destined by fate to be the ruler of the North and heir to the throne of the Ragnars. Theo was sure that Axion's worthless ambitions had led to the deaths of many people. So if Axion didn't want to get rid of his greed himself, they'd just have to make him do it. It was a fierce battle between two Ragnars who possessed great magical power. Theo used his triple strike technique, but Axion was his equal. Everyone watched the fight with horror. It was difficult to predict who would win. Theo's friends hoped that the young man would be victorious, and they would simply be allowed to leave. Axion was becoming increasingly enraged. Theo was beginning to tire from the fight, so he decided to end it. Theo delivered the final blow. Because of his stupidity and inability to stop in time, Axion lost the fight. Theo destroyed the boy. He was able to avenge Axion for his own death in a past life. It was hard for Liam to believe that Axion was dead. For the observers, it meant one thing. They had to be destroyed for failing to stop and protect the young Axion. Anger raged inside Liam. He gave the order to destroy Theo. Liam believed that the worthless Theo Ragnar had to be punished. Theo understood that his situation was dire. His chances of survival were slim, but Theo had no choice but to fight. Engaging in combat with 4 swordsmen was pointless, and after Axion's destruction, this fight was tantamount to suicide. Theo understood perfectly well that he had almost no strength left and not much mana, but the boy had no intention of running away. It was worth going to the end. All Theo could do was hope for help. He didn't understand why his friends weren't coming to his aid. Everything happened very quickly. To Theo, it seemed as if his prayers had been answered. Remington, Hulk, and Erica came to Theo's aid. The young man did not understand why they were helping him, but Remington explained that friends always help each other, so they simply could not leave him in trouble. Theo was impressed that he finally had loyal friends. Now he was not alone. Erica immediately noticed that Theo was more handsome than she had expected. Halkus enjoyed watching Theo and Axion fight. Finally, he saw how strong Theo Ragnar was. Sybil managed to cut the ropes and free himself. He immediately joined the fight with the others. Sybil believed it was his duty to protect Theo. Remington tried to explain that observers were not allowed to interfere in the trials. Moreover, they were also forbidden to engage in combat with the participants. Everything went wrong. The observers didn't know what to do next, so they waited for Liam's orders. Liam himself understood perfectly well that the plan had completely failed. They had not been able to find out about the relic of the Palace of Roses. They had not been able to destroy Theo either. Axion was dead. The villains had been caught at the scene of the crime. Barely able to stand, Liam watched the observers fight the participants of the trial. He didn't know how to fix everything, but the observers were counting on him and waiting for his orders. So Liam gave the order to destroy everyone. The observers were surprised by this decision, but Liam insisted on destruction. They would simply tell the council that the participants had been attacked by many monsters. Everyone had died. Liam took out the pearls to summon the monsters. He decided to cover his tracks and hide the Troyvans' interference. Liam hoped that the observers understood everything. Liam decided to summon 25 monsters to destroy the participants of the second stage, so he immediately decided to proceed with his plan. But Liam was stopped. Liam was wounded again from behind. The observers of the Dragon Riders in white armor, Selford Gardner and Aaron Bacchus, arrived at the scene of the battle. They were accompanied by Natasha Koppel, an observer from the Palace of Flowering Plums, and Sally Gardner, an observer from the Palace of Daffodils. The observers destroyed Liam and asked everyone to stay where they were. They warned the villains that if they continued the fight, they would end up like Liam. Theo was very happy that the observers had come to their aid. They arrived just in time. Theo thanked the observers for saving them. Remington started yelling at Theo. He didn't understand why Theo didn't call him for help. Theo's irresponsibility could have gotten him killed. Halkus hurried to inform them that Theo had no right to die until they had another duel. Erica asked Theo not to forget that they had helped him, but their conversation was interrupted by the cries of the young men. They were very grateful that Theo had come to save them. For someone like Theo, it wasn't even a pity to die. Ray Ragnar just walked up to Theo silently and hugged him. Ray was glad that Theo was okay. Theo asked his friends for help. He wanted to collect as many bells as possible to take first place. The news of Axion's destruction had already reached the council. Ed couldn't believe that Axion was gone. For Ed, it was a defeat. It was time to announce the results of the second stage. The judge hastened to announce that every participant had done a good job. Feral Ragnar, the 9 Dragons Ascending Dragon, announced that the second stage of the awakening ceremony was over. The participants in the awakening ceremony were surprised by the appearance of the rising dragon. He was rarely seen in public. No one could understand what he was doing in the Winter Mountains. Feral announced that out of the 87 participants, only 45 had passed the test. He was delighted to see so many talented people. The results of the best participant were particularly impressive. He was sure that everyone knew that those who passed the second stage had previously received the title of low-ranking swordsman. All those present received this title. Therefore, they had the right to participate in various events as proud swordsmen of the Ragnar clan. Theo Ragnar took first place in the second stage. He scored 1,121 points, but the others did not understand how Theo managed to break out of last place and take first place in such a short period of time. Second place went to Remington Narcio. He scored 926 points. Everything went exactly as Theo and Remington had planned. They took first and second place. But the awakening ceremony was not over. The third stage remained. So Feral asked those who had passed the second test to raise their hands. The second stage involved a hidden technique called elemental breathing. It was necessary to master the technique by collecting fragments of text that were randomly divided into bells. Not only were they difficult to find, but they were also difficult to understand. Only those who mastered this technique were able to apply the elemental attribute to their mana. This also gave them the right to participate in the third stage. In his past life, Theo was unable to fully master what was written, but thanks to the Dragon's Symphony, Theo could see memories. So when Theo saw the inscriptions, he was able to understand everything. Feral was impressed that 4 participants were able to master the technique. Theo remembered that, in the past, Ray and Remington were unable to master the technique, but this time everything was different. Perhaps it was because of the butterfly effect that Theo created. The participants had to show their abilities. They decided to start with Theo Ragnar. Theo understood that the future had to change because Axiona had been destroyed. He had nothing to fear. Theo was able to find thunder. It was the first fusion of mana with the attribute of thunder. After the fusion, he had to manifest thunder. Sybil was pleased to see that Theo was able to not only infuse mana but also manifest it. This was exactly what Sybil expected from Theo. Theo understood that most would have stopped at this stage, but not him. Young Theo decided to demonstrate his control over the attribute of thunder. After this spectacle, Erica began to like Theo even more. Farrell was impressed that Theo was able to master control so quickly. This meant that the rumors about Theo were true. Theo decided not to stop there. He took out his sword and decided to demonstrate the thunder breathing technique. Thunder Dragon, the 4th stage of the thunder attribute expansion. All those present were shocked by Theo's actions. The boy decided to attack Farrell. Farrell realized that Theo would not be easy to deal with. The young man had even mastered the expansion stage. Farrell did not just stand and watch. He used the water flow breathing technique, Water Cutter. Farrell told Theo that the young man deserved the right to test him. Farrell also said that Theo had done an excellent job. That is why he awarded the young man an additional 1,000 points. The Rising Dragon had always been generous to candidates with the spirit of a rival. Everyone was surprised when they heard that Theo Ragnar had 2,121 points. He even surpassed Torquell. Remington was able to earn an additional 500 points for displaying his attribute. Ray and Erica received an additional 300 points. Farrell was pleasantly surprised by the new generation. Usually 1,000 points was enough to become the best candidate. But this year there were 4 best candidates. Those who were not admitted to the 3rd stage had to return home and begin preparing for the award ceremony, which was to take place in a week. Halkus was disappointed that he did not make it to the 3rd stage. It was time to move on to the 3rd stage. Suddenly, Theo began to feel Lodblock's energy. He couldn't understand why he felt this energy. The test in the 3rd stage was to meet with the head of the Ragnar clan. It was an unpredictable test. The outcome of this test depended on the Elder Ragnar. This meeting would determine who would go to the clan leader's mansion. Each of the 5 contenders had passed the final stage. That is why an invitation to the mansion was equivalent to being recognized as the strongest candidate for the heir. But Theo still didn't understand why. If the clan chief was waiting for them at the top, the boy could feel Lodblock's energy. It seemed that Theo guessed that Lodblock's heart might belong to the clan leader, Ragnar. The participants had to fight their way through the dragon's intimidation and greet the leader. The pressure was too strong. Erica had no idea how to get to the clan chief. Theo suggested synchronizing their mana waves, but Erica didn't understand what Theo was talking about. Remington, on the other hand, understood perfectly well that Theo was talking about the counter phase that neutralized the pressure, but Remington also understood that it was much easier to say than to do. Theo explained that this pressure was used to weed out the unworthy. Only those who could control their mana could meet the clan leader. Erica couldn't understand what the boys were talking about or what language they were speaking. All this talk began to scare her a little. Remington explained that magical power was like a wave. Therefore, it was necessary to use the wave of mana to remove the pressure. She thought Remington was just bragging. He could have simply explained that the mana had to be directed toward the mountain. Remington was upset that Erica had called him a braggart. While Erica was arguing with Remington, Theo directed the wave of mana toward the mountain. His friends did not expect Theo to do it so quickly. But what did they expect from the heir to the Ragnar clan? At this time, the others just stood there while Theo decided to climb the mountain. Farrell explained that the others should hurry up because the number of points depended on who reached the top first. Farrell was delighted with Theo. He couldn't even imagine that he would want to take on a student in his old age. Kirsel arrived at the palace. She ran through the corridors of the palace looking for her little daughter, her talisman. The servants noticed that the palace had become livelier after Theo became a rising star. Kirsel burst into the room. Finally, she was able to find Cecilia. Cecilia asked her mother to behave appropriately because Kirsel was in the palace. But Kirsel did not understand what propriety meant when she was on her way to wealth. Cecilia explained that Kirsel was rich enough, but that wealth was not enough for Kirsel. After Theo became a star, Kirsal began to receive orders constantly. Finally, the smithy gained the fame it deserved. Cecilia always believed in Theo, but watching him, she began to feel overwhelmed with fear for his future. She was worried that Theo might get hurt or not be able to handle the fame. The only thing Cecilia could do was wait patiently. She wanted to help her son, but all she could do was give him gifts. But Cecilia wanted to help her son in a more meaningful way. Kirsel understood perfectly well that the days when her workshop was only engaged in the manufacture of weapons were in the past. She wanted to start making jewelry as well. Kirsel believed that this would increase her income tenfold. Cecilia wondered if her mother had ever made a prosthetic arm. Kyle stood on top of the mountain. Theo's words about the clan heir made him laugh. Kyle understood that his father had no right to stand in the way of his child's dream. Kyle also understood perfectly well that they would never be able to dampen Theo's ambitions. When they were young, they were all just like Theo. The sword graveyard was direct proof of the Ragnar's ambitions. All Kyle wanted was for their clan to prosper. Kyle wanted to destroy any obstacle to prosperity, even if his son was a regressor. But for now, it was worth watching. The head of the clan was Ragnar Kyle Ragnar. Finally, he had waited for his son. Theo greeted his father. The boy believed that he could have reached the top much faster if it weren't for Kyle's aura. Kyle wondered if the boy knew where they were. Of course, Theo knew that this was a graveyard of swords. Here lay the blades of those Kyle had defeated. That was exactly the case. Kyle explained to Theo that being the head of the clan meant facing threats alone, because you can't trust anyone. Kyle believed that strength was the only thing you could count on. Strength alone determined who a young man would become. So Kyle wondered if Theo was ready to take his place. Theo was sure he was ready. Kyle asked him not to rush his answer. Thousands of warriors wanted the same thing as Theo. First, Theo had to learn the fate of the warriors and then give his answer. Theo saw those whom Kyle had defeated. They cursed him and did not understand how he could have done such a thing. They wanted to tear Kyle to pieces, but Theo was certain that Kyle would not be able to break his resolve. Theo wanted to avenge everyone for his past life and become the head of the clan to end the struggle for the throne. If his father wanted to know if Theo was worthy, then let the young man's sword answer Kyle's question. Kyle decided to explain that there was no room for sentimentality on the battlefield. He wanted to see what she could teach him. Theo looked at his father in surprise. Could his suspicions about the dragon's heart be true? What Theo saw shocked him. He saw how he died in a duel with his father. Kyle was sure that only those with enough determination should undergo the sword test, and it was cruel even for such a gifted boy as Theo. But Kyle believed that if Theo couldn't handle it, he should die on this mountain. The clan didn't need a regressor who only brought discord. It was hard for Theo to believe that he had died at the hands of his father, but there was no point in feeling sorry for himself. He had done everything he could. He had captured the Camellia Chamber. He had destroyed Randon and Axion. Everything had turned out quite well. This time, Theo had lived a happier life than in the past. The time had come to go to his eternal rest. But Theo decided to leave when he heard a voice asking him to come to his senses. If Theo had planned to end his life that way, he would have been better off surrendering to the crows. Theo just thanked him for reminding him of his goal. Theo had to keep his word because he swore he'd see it through to the end. Of course, Theo could have been broken, but of his own free will, the boy did not want to give up. Therefore, the only way out for Theo was to continue fighting. Kyle looked at Theo with joy. He was pleased that the boy had been able to stand his ground and pass the test. A week passed after the end of the Awakening ceremony trials. Everyone gathered in the council building for the award ceremony. Halkus didn't like that so many people had gathered for the ceremony. Erica looked at her brother in surprise. She was surprised that the great Halkus was shy, but Halkus became angry. He asked her not to call him that. Didn't Erica see that the commanders of the 9 dragon squads, the former and current clan leaders, had gathered in this place? All the heroes were in one place. Erica assured Halkus that they weren't interested in a boy who couldn't even learn the alphabet. These words angered Halkus even more. Halkus decided to calm down and find out what the clan chief had said to Erica in the 3rd stage, but Erica did not want to tell him. Halkus began to rage again. He assured his sister that Theo would have told him everything long ago. Erica did not understand why Halkus had said that about Theo. Had he hid his head somewhere? Halkus decided to remind Erica that the Lankies had always been the swords of the Ragnars. Had she forgotten that? It had always been the duty of the Lankies to serve the Ragnars faithfully throughout their lives. That was why Halkus had chosen to serve someone strong, someone who was superior to others. Theo was such a person. That was why Halkus would serve the young man all his life. That was why Theo was his. Erica looked at her brother in surprise. She wondered if Theo himself knew about all this. But Halkus didn't ask Theo anything. He just wanted to go with the boy to the same unit and see how things went. Halkus didn't know the details, but for some reason, the clan chief had decided not to take Theo into service at the estate. That's why Halkus was sure that he was meant to be with Theo. The award ceremony was open to the public. Theo Ragnar was the winner of all stages. The judge asked Theo to come forward. Theo's friends were happy for him. Everyone present looked at the boy. Evelyn telepathically informed Theo that it was time for him to decide where he would join. Evelyn advised Theo to join the Dragon Riders, but of course the final choice was up to young Theo. The judge congratulated Theo on his victory and announced that the young man had passed all the tests with flying colors. Now Theo was to receive his reward. Ed Troyven, the head of the reconnaissance department, appeared at the ceremony. Had he come because of Axion? No one knew why Ed had come, but the judge asked them to leave their conversation for later. Theo believed that Ed was angry about the death of his nephew and thought that he was smart enough not to cause a scene at the ceremony. Ed smiled at Theo and said that he wanted to offer the young man the position of deputy head. Theo's victory was particularly significant. Like Ragnar, he had been at rock bottom, but Theo had managed to rise up. Theo's story of how he rose from the bottom to the top resonated with many of the sword students. Every day they talked about the glorious Theo Ragnar. In the end, many people began to look up to Theo. Their views changed from contempt to respect. The worthless Ragnar ceased to exist. Standing before these people was the winner of the Awakening ceremony. Theo successfully completed the 3rd story quest. As a reward, Theo received an ether core. The reward was in his inventory. Theo completely forgot about the quest. Young Theo decided to use his observation skills to learn more about Ed Troyven's plan. Ed Troyven was a cunning wolf in sheep's clothing. He wanted to take Theo under his wing in order to uncover the secret of the first dragon's relic. Theo knew that Ed didn't want to take him in for no reason. All this time, Ed had been interested in relics. Theo suspected that the cunning Ed already knew about the relics Theo had. The young man wanted the Troyvons to fall at his hands. Julius couldn't understand what Ed was doing. Ed explained that he had simply offered the young man to become his deputy. Did Ed really think everyone there was stupid? Everyone understood perfectly well that Ed simply wanted to take revenge on Theo for the death of his nephew. Ed assured Julius that he understood perfectly well what he was saying. Of course, Ed was angry with Theo, but he just wanted to support the best of the best. Julius considered Ed a snake. His nephew had died, and Ed was only interested in his own goals. The judge asked them to stop talking. He understood perfectly well that everyone wanted to take Theo with them, but they hadn't even started the award ceremony yet. So the judge asked if Theo had already decided where he wanted to go. But Theo said he hadn't made up his mind yet. He wanted to hear what the others had to say. Osa Ragnar was the first to speak. She offered Theo not only to become her apprentice, but also the position of young lord of the Flowering Plum Palace. Those present were shocked to hear such an offer from Lady Osa Ragnar. To the others, it sounded as if Osa Ragnar was offering to adopt the boy. After such an offer, the others had nothing to say. Robert Ragnar, the Black Dragon and captain of the Black Snow, also decided to take part in the proposal to young Theo Ragnar. The Black Dragon watched Theo throughout the awakening ceremony. He realized that Kyle had been telling the truth about Theo. The young man was indeed quite interesting. Therefore, Robert wanted Theo to join the Black Snow and offered him the rank of Snow White. Everything in the Black Snow was secret, but the rank of Snow White was higher, so it allowed one to reveal one's identity and gain fame and honor. When Theo was in Black Snow, there were only 8 people with this rank. In his past life, Theo had tried his best to earn this rank, but all his attempts had been in vain, and now this rank was being offered to him so easily. Feral Ragnar decided to remind him of his academy in the East. Theo had greatly impressed Feral during the 3rd trial. 4 of the 9 dragons offered Theo a place in their squad. It was shocking and impressive for the other students. Julius did not offer anything special to Theo. Had he decided to stand his ground until the end? Julius really wanted Theo, but he would not give him special treatment because it would be unfair to the others. But Julius could definitely guarantee full support for Theo's development and pride in his rank as a knight in white armor. But Theo only wanted to announce his choice when he was interrupted by Hilda, the former head of the clan. She was curious to know if Theo was really a regressor. But Theo didn't understand what she was talking about. Hilda explained that she didn't know what role the boy had played in his past life, but now he was playing it perfectly. Theo couldn't believe that there were many cycles, not just one. Hilda explained that he shouldn't hide it. She was also a regressor, although her cycles were over. According to Hilda, the cycle was indeed related to regression. Theo couldn't understand how this was possible, but he was curious if there were other regressors. It was worth asking Hilda directly. So, without wasting any time, Theo asked if it was possible to regress several times. Hilda was surprised that Kyle hadn't told the young man anything, although there was nothing strange about that. Kyle hated regressors. Hilda was generally surprised that Theo had survived. Hilda understood that time was short, so if Theo wanted to learn the secrets of this world and their clan, he should come to her. With that, Hilda ended the conversation. During the awakening ceremony, his father did not give Theo any answer. The only thing he showed him was the Sword of the Heart. Kyle hated regressors, and the energy of Lodblack that Theo felt during the 3rd trial. Was it Kyle who stole Lodblack's heart? Perhaps that was why he stole Lodblack's heart, because she was an ancient dragon who encountered regressors. It was impossible that Kyle was the one who defeated the ancient dragon, although Theo knew very well that his father was capable of it. Theo should have announced his choice. The young man knew very well that no one but Hilda could explain the regressors to him, so he decided that he needed to go to Hilda.